Chapter 1534. Bagushidu's stellar energy was extremely dense, and Wang Chong felt that he was even more terrifying than the likes of Gao Xianji and Fomenlinta of the Tang dynasty, the Black Yin ancestor, the Bone Devil ancestor, and Song Yuani of the martial arts world. Most shocking of all was that Wang Chong could sense a thick subtle realm energy in Bagushidu's stellar energy. Before this, the subtle realm energy that Wang Chong had encountered had always been extremely yang and scorching like the blazing flames of the sun. But the energy exuded by Bagushidu was different. It was soft, dark, and brimming with ultimate destruction. It was the complete opposite of the yang and scorching energy of the subtle realm, but the two were on the same level. This was the first time Wang Chong had encountered a completely different kind of high-level energy, and it had completely overturned Wang Chong's previous understanding of the subtle realm. Before the Tang dynasty, there were two empires, the Eastern and Western Turks. The empire led by the Western Turks, Ishbara, was the strongest, while the empire led by the Eastern Turks, Osmishkagan, was the most prosperous and had the most experts. Dujin Mountain was the holy land of the Eastern Turkic Khaganate, and because the sun rose in the east, it was the first place where the Eastern Turkic Khaganate could see the sun, so it was called the Sun Holy Land. The martial arts of this branch are completely different from those of the Central Plains. It can be considered an independent holy land of the Central Plains, outside of the Great Snow Mountain Temple. Bagushidu is a king of the Eastern Turkic Khaganate, and his martial arts are outstanding. He must have come from the Sun Holy Mountain. Wang Chong quietly said to himself, countless thoughts flitting through his mind. Every holy land of the martial arts could create an empire. The Great Snow Mountain Holy Temple on the Uzun Plateau had been continuously producing batch after batch of experts for the Uzun Empire. Therefore, no matter how long it had been, no matter how many times it had declined, no matter how many emperors had changed, in the end, the Uzun Empire would always rise again and become a threat to the dynasties of the Central Plains. Of the three holy lands of the Eastern world, the only ones that Wang Chong had not come into contact with in his previous and current lives were the experts of the Solar Holy Mountain. In the entire empire, the one who had the most frequent contact with them was probably the Anong Protector General of Yuzhou, Zhang Shoshi. Bagushidu, what do you want to do? If you want the origin immortal art, no one can stop you. As these thoughts flashed through his mind, Wang Chong quickly spoke. His expression was calm, without the slightest hint of panic. Haha, I naturally want the origin immortal art, but the king of foreign lands is also my goal. Bagushidu chuckled. Everyone says that the Tang dynasty is a land of heroes, but I didn't believe it before. Not until I saw your highness. At the age of 16, you pacified the southwest and defeated the combined armies of Uzun and Mengshizhao. At the age of 17, you were made a marquis. Before the age of 18, even the invincible Arabian Empire of the Western world was defeated, its halberds sinking into the sand, its corpses piling up in the millions. If this continues, no one in the world will be a match for your highness. It's no wonder that even the holy emperor of the Tang dynasty favors you and made an exception to make you king of foreign lands. Buzz. Wang Chong, the evil emperor, the chief of Wushang, and the distant Jili Laozu all grimaced at Bagushidu's words. Anyone who had appeared here had come for the supreme and infinite origin immortal art. If they hadn't stubbornly insisted on fighting over it, many conflicts could have been avoided. But Bagushidu's words completely changed the nature of the situation. Wang Chong's heart instantly sank, but Wang Chong's energy had been sealed, so he couldn't resist. King of foreign lands, let's go. Bagushidu faintly smiled as he pointed forward. Everyone's eyes flashed, but no one dared to move. Even though they were surrounded by powerful enemies, Bagushidu remained unafraid. He leisurely led Wang Chong toward the distant stone bridge. At this moment, everyone was conflicted. Several times, Wang Chong had controlled the third-generation successor to attack Bagushidu, but Bagushidu had only lightly clenched his fingers to make Wang Chong give up on the idea. Several times, Wang Chong had thought about using psychic energy to deal with him. But Bagushidu was no ordinary martial artist. He was at least half a step into the subtle realm, perhaps even higher. And unlike the successor, Bagushidu's mind was perfect and his will was tenacious. A few psychic energy attacks wouldn't be enough to deal with him. At this moment, no one was more conflicted than Jili Laozu. He stood next to the stone stele, the long stone bridge behind him. As long as he stepped onto the bridge, he would be able to find the supreme and infinite origin immortal art that the origin immortal lord had buried here. Moreover, his relationship with Wang Chong was clearly not as close as that of the evil emperor and the chief of Wushang. Bagushidu holding Wang Chong hostage was no threat to Jili Laozu. Hey, Jili Laozu, first come, first served? You got here first, so why don't you step onto the stone bridge first? The origin immortal art is yours. Bagushidu faintly smiled at Jili Laozu. Buzz. Jili Laozu had been considering whether or not to step onto the stone bridge, but Bagushidu's words made him hesitate. Whoever obtained the origin immortal art would be the #1 person in the world. No one could remain calm in the face of a treasure, much less decline it. Bagushidu's actions only made Jili Laozu hesitate and apprehensive. Bang! Without any warning, Jili Laozu thrust out a palm, sending a powerful wave of stellar energy imbued with the ripples of water at the stone bridge. Chang, in the boundless fog, there was only the sound of metal clashing, and then everything became silent, everything returning to silence. The wave of stellar energy that Jili Laozu had fired vanished into the sea. There's no need. Your Highness, please go first. Jili Laozu immediately retreated to the side. The evil emperor, the chief of Wushang, and even Wang Chong didn't know much about Bagushidu. But they were all in the northeast, bordering the eastern Turkic Khaganate, so Jili Laozu had a much better understanding of this supreme king of the eastern Turkic Khaganate. His strength had long ago surpassed the peak of the Saint Martial realm. Unless absolutely necessary, not even Jili Laozu would be willing to face him. In truth, even Jili Laozu had to admit that he was no match for this Turkic king. More importantly, Bagushidu possessed superior strength, and he had clearly arrived here a step earlier. If the origin immortal art were that easy to obtain, Bagushidu would have already obtained it and silently left. But not only had this Turkic king not done anything, he had even laid in wait to ambush Wang Chong. If there was nothing strange about this, then there really was a problem. At least you've got some eyes. Bagushidu glanced at Jili Laozu and smirked. He didn't mind, grabbing Wang Chong and calmly walking toward the mysterious stone bridge. Bang! As they advanced, there was a flash of light, and a white dragon of stellar energy burrowed out of the ground and lunged at Bagushidu's back. Unlike the white dragons of the past, this white dragon was much larger, and its stellar energy was much denser. It was brimming with destructive energy. White dragon swallowing the sun. The chief of Wushang had finally launched a surprise attack. In the legends of Wushang village, the ancestor of all dragons was a white dragon, and this was the origin of the white dragon divine art. And the first white dragon was said to have been born from the primal chaos and possessed the ability to devour the sun. This move was massive, but it took a long time to compress the stellar energy in one's body, making it unsuitable for battle. But now was the best time to use it. This was the reason why the chief of Wushang hadn't said anything before. How could he and the evil emperor just watch as Wang Chong was taken away and do nothing? Bang! At almost the same time, the evil emperor attacked, a massive azure palm descending from the heavens toward Bagushidu's head. The two of them had worked together without any warning, and they had moved with incredible speed. In the blink of an eye, they were less than 3 feet behind Bagushidu. And this was not the end. Boom! At almost the same time, a tangible psychic energy slammed into Bagushidu's mind. Even someone of Bagushidu's abilities couldn't help but be stunned by this sudden development. Wang Chong had an enormous amount of psychic energy, and although he couldn't use it to control Bagushidu like he could the walking corpse, he could still deal a heavy blow that would stun him for half a second. In a battle between experts, every second mattered. For an expert of Wang Chong's level, half a second was enough for him to do many things. Buzz! The three of them had not spoken a word, but their tacit understanding and teamwork had put Bagushidu at an extreme disadvantage. Success! Wang Chong was overjoyed, and a bright light flashed across his eyes. It would not be easy to mount a sneak attack on someone of Bagushidu's level. Only once he succeeded in controlling the situation and relaxed his guard would they have a chance to succeed. Moreover, Wang Chong had noticed that Bagushidu had placed most of his energy on the third-generation successor after taking control of him. Bagushidu clearly feared this former disciple of the Origin Immortal Lord even more than the rest of them. All of this was an opportunity for the three of them. Bagushidu had launched a sneak attack on them, and now the evil emperor, chief of Wushang, and Wang Chong were working together to launch a sneak attack on Bagushidu. This was what it meant to have an eye for an eye. Even Bagushidu would find it difficult to defend against this danger, but a moment later, bang! With two consecutive earth-shattering explosions, the surging astral chi violently exploded. Countless destructive strength chi swept in all directions, blowing away the dense green smoke in the surroundings. The area for 100 feet around them was empty. However, the two of them did not achieve the desired effect at all. Chapter 1535. How could this be? The Wushang village chief's eyes went wide at this sight. He had put all his strength into this attack, and he had never imagined that it would be blocked by a small cauldron. On the other side, the evil emperor was even more shocked than Chief Wushang. Ritual tool. Unlike the Chief Wushang, who had been confined to Wushang village for so long, the evil emperor had a vast breadth of vision and experience. But it was precisely for this reason that the evil emperor was even more shocked. He had recognized the two objects that had flown out of Bagushidu's body. These were two true ritual tools. In the martial arts world, there were countless treasured sabers and swords. There were also countless other treasures with special abilities, such as the iron cloak that Wang Chong had obtained, the iron box that could recognize men in black, and the 9-dragon blood war banner that had appeared on the battlefield of Talos. These were all ritual tools, and the 9-dragon blood war banner was even more astonishing. But in the entire world, including sex, there were very few things that could be called ritual tools. These ritual tools were forged from the most unique materials and were incredibly tough. Moreover, they were powerful treasures that possessed special laws. Unlike ordinary treasures, these ritual tools could fuse with a martial artist's body. Not only could they increase a martial artist's strength, they could also take the place of a martial artist to block external attacks. But what truly attracted the demonic Emperor Old Man's attention were the dark red veins on the surface of the ritual artifact. These veins covered the surface of the cauldron. These were not decorations, but the blood that flowed from Bagushidu's body into the cauldron. A ritual tool was tied to a martial artist's life, and each martial artist could only have one ritual tool in their lifetime. It could not be abandoned or taken away. Only by dying of old age or in battle could one sever their connection to the ritual tool. In this situation, the martial artist's remaining life energy, including their memories, would be sucked into the ritual tool, and then the ritual tool would search for its next master. The most special thing about magic tools was that they contained extremely powerful energy. Generations of inheritance made the energy more and more vigorous, so much so that even if an ordinary person obtained a magic tool, they could instantly become an expert of the generation. The forging of a magical artifact required the continuous efforts of every generation. It was precisely for this reason that it was extremely rare in the world of sections. The demonic Emperor Old Man had not expected to see such a rare object on a Hu expert. Earth Blood Cauldron. At this moment, the person who was the most shocked was none other than Jili Laozu, who was far away. Unlike the evil emperor and the chief of Wushang, Bagushidu was far too mysterious a figure in the northeast. Although Jili Laozu had long ago heard that Bagushidu had a powerful weapon, not even he had expected it to be a ritual tool. Moreover, it was a powerful ritual tool of the Eastern Turkic Khaganate that had been lost for more than 200 years, the Earth Blood Cauldron. The dark red inscriptions on the two cauldrons and the mysterious ancient Turkic characters on the cauldrons were the best indication that they were Earth Blood cauldrons. The Han of the Northeast and the Eastern Turkic Khaganate all understood a little Turkic, and the ancient Turkic characters on the cauldrons were extremely solemn earth prayers. As long as he had these Earth Blood cauldrons, it would be impossible for them to sneak up on Bagushidu. In an instant, everyone's expressions turned extremely ugly. Wang Chong's heart sank to the bottom of a lake. King of foreign lands, I truly can't let down my guard around you. Bagushidu suddenly spoke. Ignoring Wang Chong's master, the evil emperor, and the white-haired chief of Wushang, Bagushidu's narrow and sharp eyes smirked at Wang Chong. The attacks of the evil emperor and the chief of Wushang were secondary, as they could never break through his ritual tool. What had almost caused Bagushidu to fail was Wang Chong's psychic energy attack. At that moment, even the earth blood cauldrons in his body had been affected. If the earth blood cauldrons had appeared just half a beat too late, Wang Chong's group might really have succeeded. Bagushidu had never expected that the least threatening would actually be the most threatening. King of foreign lands, forgive me for asking, but when did you notify them? Bagushidu directed his last question at Wang Chong. In other words, Wang Chong had been the one to command and plan the operation just now. Wang Chong said nothing, but his heart sank. Their greatest mistake had been underestimating Bagushidu. This Eastern Turkic king was far more frightening than they had imagined. The winner takes all. Since I've lost, I have nothing to say. Whatever you want to do with it, do as you please. Wang Chong calmly said as he slowly closed his eyes. Bagushidu was simply too powerful. In this situation, no one present was a match for him. Hey, relax. You are the king of foreign lands of the Tang dynasty, the war god of the new generation feared by both the Western and Eastern worlds. Some people even say that your grasp of the art of war has already surpassed that of So Young-sun of 100 years ago. This king has always respected this sort of person and has never been so crude. After all, this king has a request of you. Bagushidu spoke cheerfully. Even though Wang Chong and the evil emperor had almost succeeded in scheming against him, he did not seem angry at all. Wang Chong did not care about Bagushidu's nonsense. If he really had such good intentions, he would not have attacked him. What he truly cared about were Bagushidu's final words. Bagushidu, if you want to kill me or torture me, do as you please. What other tricks do you want to play? Wang Chong opened his eyes and stared at Bagushidu. Hey, relax. You'll understand in a little while. Bagushidu faintly smiled as he grabbed Wang Chong and rose into the air. Like a dragonfly skimming the surface of the water, he flew up to the stone bridge. Demonic Emperor, this king is not always so patient. If you continue to follow, don't blame this king for being merciless. I'll first kill the king of foreign lands, and then kill you. In any case, this king will still get the origin immortal art in the end. The evil emperor and the chief of Wushang were just about to pursue when they heard Bagushidu's voice in the mist, causing them to stiffen and stop. Wang Chong had never expected that the operation for the origin immortal art would end up like this. He had dodged the dragon beasts and the stellar-piercing beetles, defeated the nightmare beast and dark shadow spider, and escaped the pursuit of the men in black and the walking corpses. But in the end, at the place closest to the origin immortal treasury, Wang Chong had lost to Bagushidu, who was like the mantis stalking the cicada, unaware of the aureole behind it. This person's strength had completely surpassed his imagination. Although he had kept a low profile, Wang Chong could sense that his strength had already surpassed the four of them. And if he also had the ritual tools of the Eastern Turkic Khaganate, none of them would be a match for him. The only thing this person was afraid of was the four of them, as well as the third-generation walking corpses' joint attack. Did Osmish Kagan send you? Wang Chong suddenly asked. In the face of danger, he had actually calmed down. Hey, he can't order me around. Bagushidu faintly smiled. Oh. Wang Chong's eyebrows rose in surprise at these words. Osmish only offered a condition that I couldn't refuse. Bagushidu indifferently said, a hint of pride on his face. Wang Chong was surprised. His life was in someone else's hands, but Wang Chong was indifferent. But the only thing that surprised him was that the rumors were a little different from the truth. He had learned from Jili Laozu that Bagushidu had an extraordinary status in the Eastern Turkic Khaganate, but he hadn't expected him to ignore the Khagan's orders like this. It seemed like Bagushidu's status in the Eastern Turkic Khaganate was even higher than he had imagined. What condition? Wang Chong couldn't help but ask. Bagushidu said nothing, only glanced at Wang Chong in surprise. A normal person would have turned pale in the face of a life-and-death crisis, sweating profusely, even begging for mercy. But Wang Chong's calmness was somewhat unexpected. He was even concerned about his deal with Osmish Kagan. Heh, this isn't some secret that can't be revealed. Before you die, this king will fulfill your wish. If there's anything you want to know, this king can tell you. To his surprise, Wang Chong had expected Bagushidu to refuse, but he had actually agreed. But Wang Chong quickly understood, and his heart sank. The more generous Bagushidu was, the more it was clear that he would not let him go. In truth, Osmish didn't say much. He only told this king that if we can kill you in this operation, he will make the Mount Sun sect of the Eastern Turks the state religion, and I will become the state teacher of the Eastern Turks. With a few simple words, Bagushidu explained the deal he had made with the Eastern Turkic Kagan Osmish. As he spoke, he held Wang Chong hostage as he stepped onto the stone bridge and continued forward. Black stellar energy surged through Wang Chong's body, and even if Wang Chong wanted to stop, he couldn't. Tut. Footsteps echoed across the stone bridge as the two figures flickered in and out of sight in the green mist. As Wang Chong stepped onto the stone bridge, he felt a chill run down his spine. As he looked around, he saw that the two sides of the bridge were so deep that he couldn't see the bottom. Other than the lamps that lit up every 5 steps, there was no other defensive mechanism. If he fell from here, he would almost certainly die. Moreover, Wang Chong sensed that even though the passage they had come from was 16,000 meters deep, this abyss was even more terrifying. This place is probably tens of thousands of meters deep. Chapter 1536. Although I've never been to the Eastern Turkic Khaganate and don't know what's going on in the Khaganate, given your strength and the imperial household, it shouldn't be too difficult for you to become state teacher, right? Wang Chong quickly composed himself and asked. Wang Chong sensed that this was his best chance to understand the internal situation of the Eastern Turkic Khaganate, especially the power structure within it. You're not one of us Turks, so you don't understand the weight and status of state teacher amongst us Turks. It's normal for you to ask this question. Bagushidu smiled as he glanced at Wang Chong, apparently seeing through his intentions, but he had no intention of refusing. Wang Chong was already injured and had even suffered a cultivation defect. If Bagushidu still couldn't deal with him while his stellar energy was sealed, he would truly be a laughingstock. The Eastern Turkic Khaganate has many schools of thought, somewhat similar to your Central Plains. However, among all the sects, our Earth sect is the mainstream, as well as the strongest. The state teachers of the Turkic Khaganate, generation after generation, have all come from our Earth sect. Bagushidu led Wang Chong forward, his sleeves fluttering in the wind. His steps were calm and unhurried, as if he were taking a leisurely stroll through a courtyard. Whether it's the Eastern Turks or the Western Turks, whether they split or reunited, as the state teacher of the entire Turkic Khaganate, the Earth sect has a status and glory that transcends the secular world. This has become a tradition. But as time passed, and after that incident 200 years ago, the Earth sect no longer produced a state teacher, and the Eastern and Western Turkic Khaganates also removed the state teachers. Henceforth, the Turks no longer had a state teacher or a state religion. To our Earth sect, this was a great humiliation. As Bagushidu spoke, Wang Chong noticed that his expression had turned solemn and a hint of pain had flashed through his eyes. Wang Chong couldn't help but be surprised. From then on, our Earth sect's successive sect masters did everything in their power to have the Eastern and Western Khaganates acknowledge the imperial preceptor once more, restoring the Earth sect's status as the state religion. Alas, both the Western Turks and the Eastern Turks placed too much emphasis on power. Little did they know that if the Earth sect became the national religion, it would be able to unite the hearts of the people and unite the two Khaganates. Moreover, the imperial advisors of the past did not participate in politics, so they did not threaten their royal authority. Unfortunately, everyone is short-sighted and can't see this point. That's why the Earth sect's long-cherished wish has never been realized. Bagushidu seemed to recall many things of the past, and his eyes dimmed. But a few moments later, Bagushidu regained his composure. Therefore, when Osmish proposed to make me the Grand Preceptor, I couldn't refuse. As Bagushidu spoke, he suddenly stopped and glanced at Wang Chong, a smirk on his face. The Tang dynasty's king of foreign lands is renowned throughout the world, using countless corpses to forge his awe-inspiring reputation. Although this king does not participate much in politics as an Eastern Turkic king, even if I didn't consider the matter of the imperial advisor, for the sake of the countless people of the Eastern Turkic Khaganate, this king would still have to intervene once, lest what happened in Khorasan be repeated in the Eastern Turkic Khaganate. These words caused Wang Chong's heart to thump and his heart to sink. In the Battle of Khorasan, Wang Chong had used the icy weather to scheme against the Arabian Empire, causing them to lose hundreds of thousands of soldiers, countless governors and generals. This was a major achievement for the Tang dynasty, but to the countries bordering the Tang dynasty, it made them deeply apprehensive of Wang Chong. They viewed him as a thorn in their sides, a massive threat to their empires, and they wanted nothing more than to kill him as quickly as possible. Bagushidu was clearly referring to this matter. I didn't think that Osmish Khagan and His Highness Imperial Highness would have such a high opinion of me. Wang Chong suddenly sighed. Bagushidu had been planning to deal with him from the very start, and today's matter would probably be difficult to resolve. Don't be afraid of overestimating, only underestimating. Who knows how many experts of the Central Plains have gathered in the appearance of the Origin Immortal Treasury? But I'm afraid that everyone underestimated you the most. Bagushidu indifferently said. Oh. Wang Chong turned to Bagushidu, his eyes flashing. Bagushidu's attitude had caught him by surprise. It seemed that Bagushidu had a rather inappropriate appreciation for this great foe of the Turks. You people of the Central Plains have a saying, the player is confused while the spectator sees the game clearly. Whether it's Song Yuani or the Blackeen ancestor, these experts of the righteous and evil sects of the Central Plains underestimate you too much. According to what they said, you should have cultivated your master's evil cultivation technique and entered a state of chi deviation. And in terms of strength, talent, and seniority, you're far inferior to them. It's no wonder that Song Yuani doesn't think much of you. But you were the one who broke the Origin Immortal formation left behind by the Origin Immortal Lord, and you were the one who opened the true treasury. You even managed to get to the core of the Origin Immortal Treasury before Song Yuani and the others. If once is just a coincidence, then twice, thrice. It's not that simple. This king is different from Song Yuani. I have never underestimated my opponents. From the start, I felt that you weren't that easy to deal with. That's why I didn't make a move earlier. Bagushidu said. Strong winds blew over the stone bridge, and thick fog drifted about. As Wang Chong stood on the bridge, he felt a chill run down his spine. He had never interacted with Bagushidu, and he had never interacted with him before, but he had never imagined that Bagushidu would place such importance on him. Now that he thought about it, it seemed like Bagushidu had been paying special attention to him the moment he appeared in the northwest, near the Origin Immortal formation. While he was doing his utmost to search for the Origin Immortal art, there was a pair of eyes staring at him from behind. This was not a good feeling. Your Highness is truly capable. It seems like I fell into your trap from the very start. Now that I think about it, when you sent someone to deliver that treasure map, you had already planned everything. Everyone thought that they had taken advantage of the situation, but who could have imagined that they would all be working for you? Wang Chong said. Bagushidu waved his sleeve and smiled, a hint of pride on his face. The king of foreign lands praises me too much. To be praised as the disciple of the Son of Heaven, the holy emperor of the Tang dynasty, is enough for this king to be proud. But there is one thing that this king does not understand. This king's art of concealing energy is unparalleled in the world. Not even the monsters in the underground caves or the walking corpses guarding the checkpoints could see through it. Just how did you see through it? Bagushidu said. The solar holy mountain of the Eastern Turks was a land of martial arts heritage from the Central Plains, and all the martial arts of the Central Plains were completely different from those of the Prime Minister. Of all these martial arts, the Earth Sect's art of Dark Heaven was the most unique, and it could be called the #1 art for concealing one's tracks. Bagushidu was extremely proud of this supreme art of the Earth Sect. In truth, the fact that he had been able to casually stroll through all the checkpoints and reach this place before everyone else was proof enough of his skill. But Wang Chong had managed to see through the world's #1 art of Dark Heaven. If he hadn't sensed that something was wrong and struck first, he might not have been able to capture Wang Chong so easily. This question had been on his mind the entire time. Bagushidu truly wanted to know how Wang Chong had managed to do it. Bagushidu's nonchalant words caused Wang Chong to involuntarily tremble in shock. Art of Dark Heaven? So it turns out that he relied on this secret art to arrive here safely. Wang Chong raised an eyebrow in surprise. Bagushidu's words had inadvertently revealed his secret. Wang Chong had always believed that Bagushidu had fought his way here, but from what he had said, it seemed like Bagushidu had never fought at all. Wang Chong remained silent. Bagushidu stood on the side, in no rush. His expression was gentle and courteous, and his words were polite. It was like the two of them were old friends who had not seen each other for a very long time. It was impossible to hate him or treat him as an ordinary enemy. But despite his words, his grip on Wang Chong's arm had not loosened in the slightest. Just as he had said, Bagushidu had never been careless when it came to his enemies, much less underestimating them. This guy is really scary. Wang Chong's heart shivered. He wanted to ignore Bagushidu and not give him an answer, but now that he thought about it, what difference did it make if he said it or not? Lanterns. Wang Chong pointed at the oil lamps quietly burning on the stone bridge and finally said. Bagushidu froze, confusion in his eyes. He didn't understand why Wang Chong had noticed that he was related to the lanterns. But a moment later, Bagushidu understood and gave a long sigh. It was my negligence. King of foreign lands, this king somewhat understands why you, at such a young age, can be called the new war god of the Tang dynasty and make all sides fear you. The burning lamps would give off thick smoke and leave a burning smell in the air. Bagushidu had been so focused on concealing his aura that he hadn't noticed that when he stepped on the stone bridge, the burning lamps had left a burning smell in the air. It was only when Wang Chong smelled the burning scent in the air that he realized the flaw. King of foreign lands, this king rarely admires anyone, but this time, this king truly admires you. I didn't think that our Earth-sex art of dark heaven would lose in a place like this. Bagushidu raised his head and sighed, his words seeming to express even more admiration and favor for Wang Chong. But Bagushidu's words made Wang Chong's heart shiver. Bagushidu's words were filled with admiration, but Wang Chong could sense a hidden killing intent in his voice, one that was even stronger than before. Chapter 1537. Your Highness. Wang Chong was just about to use this chance to learn more about Bagushidu and find some flaws when a gust of wind blew past him. Wang Chong's body trembled in shock as he saw what was in front of him. At that moment, the fog on the stone bridge was blown away by the strong wind. A figure stood there looking very strange. How could this be? Wang Chong's heart thumped, and he immediately stopped speaking. He had always believed that there was no one else here besides him and Bagushidu, but it was now apparent that this was not the case. Something's wrong. Wang Chong quickly sensed that something was wrong. This figure on the stone bridge was extremely abrupt, and it wasn't very far from Wang Chong's group, but Wang Chong couldn't sense any human energy from it. Moreover, Wang Chong turned his head to Bagushidu and saw that Bagushidu was smirking at him. At that moment, Wang Chong immediately understood. If someone had really gotten here first, Bagushidu would never have been so calm. King of foreign lands, I truly can't hide anything from you. It seems like you've already guessed it. Bagushidu had been observing Wang Chong this entire time, and not a single change in expression could escape his eyes. But Bagushidu didn't say anything. With a wave of his hand, he led Wang Chong along the stone bridge. Let's go. I'll take you to see. The two of them slowly advanced, and a moment later, Wang Chong finally saw that person on the stone bridge. The man was tall and stalwart. He wore a tattered robe that fluttered in the strong wind. His feet were spread apart, and just by standing there he exuded an extremely powerful aura, exuding the air of a grandmaster who looked down on the world. But even though the two were only 6 feet apart, Wang Chong couldn't sense any life from this person. And when Wang Chong scanned the stone bridge with his psychic energy, he was even more certain of this. This was a dead person, and judging from his tattered and weathered clothes, he had been dead for a very long time. Just who is this person? Wang Chong muttered to himself, an indescribably strange feeling in his heart. Everyone knew that the Origin Immortal Treasury could only be opened by gathering all 6 pieces of the treasure map, and even then, the path would be fraught with danger. There would be all sorts of traps and monsters, and there was also the 5th-generation successor standing guard. But Wang Chong had never imagined that there would be someone who had entered this place earlier than him, and had even managed to reach the core and reach the stone bridge. The dead martial arts expert who stood motionless on the stone bridge was like a mystery, shrouding everything in a layer of unknown fog. Wang Chong's eyes quickly examined this person, but a moment later his gaze traveled down the man's robe to the totem of the celestial wolf on his ankles, which exuded a black luster. Wang Chong's eyes narrowed. This was a Turk. Only a few Turks, and Turkic nobles of extraordinary status, would have the totem of the celestial wolf tattooed on their ankles. Buzz! A bolt of lightning flashed through Wang Chong's mind, and he immediately began to think of many things. But as he carefully thought about them, he couldn't seem to come up with anything. This is the patriarch of our solar holy mountains Earth sect from 200 years ago, Ishinishidu. He was also the last state teacher of our Turks. Bagushidu solemnly took 2 steps forward, and for the first time, he slightly loosened his grip on Wang Chong's wrist. He clasped his hands together and bowed to the state teacher of the Turks, his expression one of utmost respect. State teacher? 200 years ago, Wang Chong's eyes widened in shock. The mighty state teacher of the Turks had appeared 16,000 meters underground, and he had even died in the core of the Origin Immortal Treasury. Who would believe such a thing? As Wang Chong stared at the back of that figure, the strange feeling in his heart grew even stronger. Wang Chong was well aware that 200 years ago, a story that he did not know of had taken place underground. But Wang Chong was in no rush and did not ask. Since Bagushidu was willing to say Ishinishidu's name, even if Wang Chong did not ask, Bagushidu would tell him the story. As expected, Wang Chong quickly heard Bagushidu's voice. Ishinishidu is a Turkic word that means son of the celestial wolf, son of God. He was the most outstanding genius of our solar holy mountain and one of the strongest grandmasters of our Earth sect. Not even 20 years old, he defeated all the competitors of the Earth sect, including the elders of the sect, and became the new state teacher of the Turks. And at 27, he comprehended a supreme secret art and became the #1 expert of the Eastern and Western Turkic Khaganates. Not only that, Ishinishidu was extremely knowledgeable, and he had long ago learned all the martial arts of our solar holy mountain, fused them together, and created a powerful technique of his own. And whether it was the Central Plains, the Turks, the Uzun, or Mengshizhao, he knew all martial arts. According to his plan, after defeating all the experts of the Eastern and Western Turkic Khaganates and forcing all the martial artists of the Western regions to submit to him, Ishinishidu immediately went south to the Central Plains to have a showdown with the experts of the Central Plains, exchanging pointers in their martial arts so that they could reach an even higher level. The Central Plains is rife with experts and is hailed as the holy land of martial arts. Moreover, the martial arts there are completely different from those of the solar holy mountain. Ishinishidu spent 6 months traveling from the north to the south, visiting all the sects, big and small, with the utmost courtesy. In these 6 months, he traveled the world, visiting all sorts of experts, but not a single one of them was a match for him. The vast majority of people couldn't even last a single exchange with him, and a small number of people were able to block 2 or 3 blows from Ishinishidu, but that was all. Ishinishidu felt rather disappointed. Bagushidu's recount of events from 200 years ago, coupled with the image of Ishinishidu standing on the stone bridge, his corpse not rotting even after 200 years, gave off a powerful impact. It was as if those events from several hundred years ago were happening right before their eyes. But Wang Chong imperceptibly creased his brow. He was not a person of the martial arts world, so he didn't know much about its affairs. But Bagushidu's words made him recall some of the stories of the martial arts world that he had heard from his master, the evil emperor. The evil emperor had mentioned that Ishinishidu had challenged the Central Plains 200 years ago, but it was the exact opposite of the refined and courteous manner that Bagushidu had described. He went to the Central Plains to challenge the various sects, and even if they avoided fighting, he would force them into action, and his methods were extremely cruel. Most of his defeated opponents had their tendons severed, and their cultivation was crippled. When Ishinishidu challenged a sect, he would destroy it, and the number of sects that he had destroyed in the martial arts world numbered in the hundreds. Ishinishidu might have respected those who could defeat him, but he viewed those who were weaker than him as ants. In his journey south, Ishinishidu had almost never encountered an opponent that could defeat him, and countless experts had died at his hands. This was the first time that a single who had stirred up a calamity in the Central Plains. Based on what his master, the evil emperor, had said, Ishinishidu truly was very strong, and the vast majority of the martial artists of the martial arts world were no match for him. But it was not necessarily true that he was invincible. At the very least, Wang Chong knew that everyone in the martial arts world knew of people like Song Yuani and the Black Yin ancestor, but how many people knew of the Tang dynasty's war god So Yong-sun or Anshi war god Gao Xinji, let alone the holy emperor hidden in the palace? These people would never fight with the martial arts world for the rest of their lives, and no matter what calamity befell the martial arts world, they would never interfere. But to those who had challenged the Central Plains, if they could defeat the Righteous Alliance Lord of the Righteous Path, Song Yuani, they would have defeated all the experts of the Central Plains. Thus, it was impossible to say. But at the time, the calamity that Ishinishidu had stirred up had finally angered those hidden experts of the Central Plains. By the time those hidden experts had gathered and prepared to deal with Ishinishidu, the Turkic state teacher had already left the Central Plains and headed north. They chased after Ishinishidu, hoping to catch up, but once they left the fortress, they lost sight of him. And after that, there was no more news of him. This person appeared out of nowhere like a comet, but also disappeared without a trace in a very short period of time, like a falling star. The demonic emperor had only told this story to Wang Chong, and neither Wang Chong nor the evil emperor had paid it much attention. After all, this was a matter from several hundred years ago, far too distant from the present. But Wang Chong had never imagined that the who had stirred up a calamity in the Central Plains and massacred almost the entire martial arts world was actually the founding ancestor of Bagushidu's Earth sect. Moreover, his corpse was not in the holy land of the Turkic solar holy mountain, but in the sunless core of the Origin immortal treasury, where he had silently died on a stone bridge. And right in front of him. Chapter 1538. The realm he had reached was the highest realm in the world. However, when he left the Central Plains and headed north to the northern border, Ishinishidu encountered a person, a Han. The moment Ishinishidu saw him, he sensed that this person was extremely powerful, much stronger than any opponent he had encountered before. Ishinishidu chased him for 10 days and 10 nights, all the way from the northeast to the northwest. Only when he got close to the western regions did he force him to fight. Wang Chong's eyes widened at Bagushidu's mention of the northwest, as if he had sensed something. Bagushidu hadn't given a detailed explanation, but Wang Chong could already guess at some of the details. The moment the two clashed, Ishinishidu realized that this person was using a martial art that was completely different from the martial arts of the Turks, the Central Plains, the Uzan, or the Arabs that he knew of. Let alone seeing it, he had never even heard of it. Moreover, this person's stellar energy was extremely young and unyielding. Not only was it powerful, it could even refine his opponent's attacks. Ishinishidu's cultivation has already reached a transformative level, and his stellar energy has become extremely dense. But when he attacked, 70 to 80% of his stellar energy was dissipated by him, and he even used it against him. After all, Ishinishidu had already reached the subtle realm of dark radiant heaven. If he hadn't reached this level, he would have been even less of a match. But even so, it's already a huge shock to him. Ishinishidu is knowledgeable. He has read countless books on the martial path, but none of them mentioned anything related to this technique. The more Ishinishidu fought, the more alarmed he became. He knew that he had probably encountered a true hidden expert of the Central Plains. That person had an endless array of martial arts, none of which Ishinishidu had ever seen before. The two exchanged more than 1,000 blows, but not only did Ishinishidu fail to win, he even ended up on the back foot. Such a thing had never happened before. In the end, the mysterious man took the initiative to stop fighting, saying that he did not like to kill, had no interest in fame and fortune, and did not want to fight to the death with anyone. He hoped that everyone would stop when the time was right. Ishinishidu sincerely admired that person's character, and the mysterious expert also felt sympathetic towards Ishinishidu because of his great strength. The two of them didn't get to know each other without fighting, and they actually became close friends because of this. But then something happened. That person seemed to have misunderstood Ishinishidu, and the two of them fought and became enemies. Ishinishidu felt very pained and regretful about this matter. However, the other party's misunderstanding of Ishinishidu was so deep that he didn't listen to Ishinishidu's explanation and directly jumped into a cave. Ishinishidu had no choice but to jump down with him and chase after him. A hint of regret appeared in Bagushidu's eyes, as if he was regretting the falling out between friends. But before Bagushidu could finish, Wang Chong interrupted him. If my guess is right, that mysterious person you speak of is the Origin Immortal Lord's 6th-generation disciple. Wang Chong had exposed the mystery with a single sentence. He had chased Ishinishidu from the northeast to the northwest, neutralized his opponent's energy, and had also revealed that Ishinishidu had died on the stone bridge leading to the core of the Origin Immortal Treasury. One didn't even need to think to realize that this mysterious person was the Origin Immortal Lord's 6th-generation disciple, the 6th-generation successor who had killed the 4N's martial lord with a single palm strike. Ishinishidu's invasion of the Central Plains had caused such a huge uproar that not even Wang Chong had imagined that he would encounter the 6th-generation successor of the Origin Immortal Lord on his way home. It was no wonder that so many experts of the Central Plains had failed to find him, or even find any information about him. How many people could even come into contact with the state teacher of the Eastern Turks? But to Wang Chong, there was something else that he despised the most. The people of the Origin Immortal Palace are ignorant of the ways of the world and have never had much interaction with the martial arts world of the Central Plains. And based on what you said, given Ishinishidu's personality, since he knew of the existence of the Origin Immortal Art, he would have sought guidance and discussion with the successor of the Origin Immortal Art. Martial arts are never taught to outsiders, and the Origin Immortal Art is one of the supreme arts of the Central Plains, ranked first among the 10 great arts. Ishinishidu wanted to directly ask for it, but there was no such reason. Since Ishinishidu couldn't obtain it, he would have to think of another way. If my guess is correct, Ishinishidu took advantage of the moment the 6th-generation successor of the Origin Immortal Art was off guard to ambush him. This is the only way to explain why the 6th-generation successor died here 200 years ago. Bagushidu, your skin is truly thick. You're able to speak of such a shameless matter in such an open and above-board manner. What, mutual appreciation, and falling out because of a misunderstanding? I truly admire you. Wang Chong's words were brimming with derision as he laid bare the truth. If it was just a small misunderstanding, then everything in the world could be categorized as a misunderstanding if one forsook one's morals and pursued one's enemies all the way to the Origin Immortal Palace 16,000 meters beneath the ground. This is a matter from several hundred years ago. Whether it's good or bad, isn't it up to future generations to judge? Is there any need to take some things so seriously? Bagushidu was not angered by Wang Chong's revelation. He only faintly smiled and brushed the matter aside. In short, the patriarch of our Earth sect followed us here, but alas, the 6th-generation successor of the Origin Immortal Art was too shrewd. He used all sorts of traps to deal with Ishinishidu, but in the end, Ishinishidu neutralized all of them. This was also Ishinishidu's first time seeing so many unknown secrets deep underground, and it was an eye-opener for him. Thus, he was in no rush to explain himself. On the way here, Ishinishidu dealt with every move that came his way, and the 6th-generation successor of the Origin Immortal Art had no effect on him. Unexpectedly, the 6th-generation successor of the Origin Immortal Art became suspicious and led him to the core of the Origin Immortal Treasury, where he used an extremely powerful weapon to kill Ishinishidu on the stone bridge. The most outstanding state teacher of our Turkic Khaganate from 200 years ago ended up slumbering underground, a truly regrettable death. More importantly, with Ishinishidu's death, the influence of the Earth sect and the entire Sun Holy Mountain was greatly weakened. From then on, there was no more state preceptor for the next 200 years. Later on, the Eastern and Western Khans removed the title of state teacher. Our Earth sect was unable to recover from this setback and declined to this point. Bagushidu couldn't help but sigh dejectedly. He had personally experienced the decline of the Earth sect. Furthermore, as the current sect master of the Earth sect, he was far more shocked than anyone else when he spoke of such matters. Wang Chong was indifferent. It was rare for Bagushidu to reveal his true feelings in front of a Han. Wang Chong could sense that Bagushidu was speaking from the bottom of his heart. Even as an enemy, Wang Chong had to admit that this Earth sect master of the Eastern Turks was completely different from any opponent he had ever faced. There was a grace and bearing about him that no one else had. In the end, all of this is just your imagination. You didn't see it with your own eyes, and all these stories are based on conjectures and reasonable conjectures. There's no concrete evidence, so they naturally can't be taken as true. Wang Chong suddenly said, "Haha, how do you know that I didn't see it with my own eyes?" Bagushidu suddenly turned his head and gave Wang Chong a deep glance, his lips curling into a smirk. Wang Chong's heart thumped, and he was momentarily speechless. The story of the Eastern Turks state teacher Ishinishidu and the sixth-generation successor of the origin immortal art had taken place more than 200 years ago, and no one could have seen it with their own eyes. But Bagushidu's expression, it made Wang Chong's hair stand on end, and it didn't seem like he was just saying it. But how could such a thing be possible? On the other side, Bagushidu turned his head back to the thick fog and began to speak, no longer paying attention to Wang Chong. Ishinishidu was heavily injured and knew that he didn't have long to live. But he had spent his entire life practicing martial arts and was deeply obsessed with it. How could he be willing to pay such a heavy price, even losing his life here? Moreover, the more he fought with the sixth-generation successor of the origin immortal art, the more he realized just how broad and profound this art was. As such, before he died, he gathered all of his power and used the supreme secret technique of our Earth sect to seal all of his experiences and half of his power into the 3 earthen blood cauldrons. Then he passed through the layers of rocks and delivered them to the 2 servants who had been following him all this time. Bagushidu slowly recounted the history of the Earth sect. But toward the end, Bagushidu said nothing more. There were some things that needed to be said here, and there was no need to add more. When Bagushidu had passed through so many dangers and arrived at the core of the origin immortal treasury, stood on the stone bridge, and witnessed with his own eyes the corpse of the state teacher of the Turks, Ishinishidu, accomplishing what none of the Earth sect masters had been able to do in the last 200 years, Bagushidu seemed to be in urgent need of an audience to share his story. And Wang Chong, the king of foreign lands of the Tang dynasty, was the best audience. After all, he was about to die. Wang Chong said nothing, but his mind was in turmoil. At this moment he finally understood why Bagushidu had appeared here, why he had a treasure map, and why he had been able to use the art of the dark heaven to foresee the traps and get to this place before anyone else. The events from 200 years ago had been reincarnated, and in the end, they had returned to this place. Chapter 1539. Bagushidu held Wang Chong in the back as the 2 of them brushed past Ishinishidu's corpse. This time, Bagushidu didn't even glance at it. Only Wang Chong subconsciously turned his head. Ishinishidu's back was domineering and disdainful. Even after more than 200 years, his clothes in tatters, that tyrannical aura of a man who fought against the heavens had never changed. But when Wang Chong turned to face him, everything changed. Ishinishidu's eyes had turned into black skulls, and as he stared up into the sky, he seemed to be preparing to throw the 3 earth blood cauldrons to the ground at the last moment. But when Wang Chong passed him, he saw a frightening sight. Ishinishidu's chest had been completely cut open by a sharp blade, his ribs completely pulverized. It was a gruesome sight to behold. Anyone who had suffered such a grievous injury, let alone Ishinishidu, would surely die. It was no wonder that he had chosen to seal all his energy and memories into the 3 blood cauldrons. But a few moments later, Wang Chong was pulled by a powerful force to follow Bagushidu. Bagushidu, I've heard the story of your Earth sect. Why did you capture me? If you want to kill me, then do it. Don't play any more tricks. Even if I fall into your hands, I won't be able to escape. Wang Chong was forced to follow Bagushidu, but he still had a strange feeling. Based on what he had said, the Eastern Turkic Khaganate, Osmish included, viewed him as a thorn in their side. If Bagushidu wanted to kill him, he could have done so directly. There was no need for him to play so many tricks, no need for him to say so many things. You'll soon find out what I want you to do. Bagushidu grinned, an unfathomable expression on his face. Without another word, he led Wang Chong to the end of the stone bridge. The entire core of the treasury was silent. With the second-generation successor standing guard outside, no other martial artists could break in for the time being. Wang Chong and Bagushidu walked side by side, their footsteps echoing across the stone bridge. Clatter, clatter, clatter. From afar, the sound of chains shaking and swaying could be heard. The sound of the chains was particularly strange, and it instantly attracted Wang Chong's attention. We're here. At this moment, Bagushidu spoke. The stone bridge was shrouded in mist, making it impossible to see his master and the chief of Wushang. Bagushidu's face was also faintly discernible in the mist, giving him an air of mystery. The cold winds caused Bagushidu's black robe to flap in the wind, but Bagushidu continued to stare forward in fascination. King of foreign lands, I'm afraid that our fate ends here. There was something special about Bagushidu's expression. So, in the end you chose to take action here? Wang Chong sneered, not a shred of fear in his eyes. His gaze quickly swept across the surroundings. The green stone bridge had already come to an end here. At the end of the stone bridge, Wang Chong saw 2 chains as thick as a child's arm, extending into the mist. The clattering sound that Wang Chong heard previously came from the vibrations of these chains. No one knew where these chains led, and everything here was shrouded in a veil of mystery. Wang Chong faced the cold wind as he stood at the top of the stone bridge. Even now, he still didn't understand why Bagushidu hadn't killed him, nor did he understand what Bagushidu wanted to do. Perhaps he wanted something from him. Do you see over there? While Wang Chong was at his most confused, a familiar voice rang out in his ear. Bagushidu's robes flapped in the wind as he extended a finger and pointed forward. Back then, the patriarch of our Earth sect, Ishinishidu, was just a little bit away from obtaining the origin immortal art and everything here. Alas, he ran into that sword in the end. That sword was so powerful that even Ishinishidu, who had already broken into the dark radiant heaven, was no match for it. In the end, he was heavily injured by that divine sword and lost his life. Rather than saying that Ishinishidu lost to the origin immortal lord's successor, it would be better to say that he lost to that divine sword. Wang Chong did his best to look ahead, but the vibrating chains and the thick mist made it impossible for Wang Chong to see anything. A moment later, Wang Chong tried to send out his enormous psychic energy, but he quickly sensed a powerful psychic seal. This psychic seal was dozens of times larger than the one Wang Chong had sensed in the cave. Wang Chong had barely sent out his psychic energy when it was shattered by this energy. Wang Chong frowned, a very strange feeling in his heart. The psychic seal in this area had the same effect of disrupting psychic energy as the one he had encountered in the cave, but its structure and form were completely different from the psychic seal Wang Chong had encountered before. This energy was like fish scales, randomly distributed in the air. It was a completely different form of psychic seal. Not only that, although Wang Chong felt that this psychic seal was extremely powerful, Wang Chong hadn't sensed it when he first entered the core. In other words, this psychic seal had a range, and it wasn't very large. But at this moment, a majestic bolt of stellar energy howled out of Wang Chong's side, plunging into the thick mist like a bolt of lightning. Flap flap. A fierce gale stirred up by a mere wave of Bagushidu's sleeve was enough to scatter the mist in front of him. A moment later, in the depths of the fog, Wang Chong suddenly saw a tall figure, indistinct and lofty like a mountain. This person stood on one foot, and when Wang Chong looked over, he saw that this person was also looking at Wang Chong and Bagushidu. Not even Wang Chong was prepared for this, and he was given a fright. But Wang Chong quickly realized something: first generation. Wang Chong's heart thumped as he called out. When Bagushidu's sleeve emerged, when the mist was at its thinnest, Wang Chong could see the golden origin immortal insignia on his chest. Although this person was standing there motionless, and Wang Chong couldn't sense any living energy from him, this person gave off the same feeling as the other generations of walking corpses. These walking corpses were not ordinary corpses. They had special seals in their bodies that could not be changed. Wang Chong had encountered the 6th generation successor, the 5th generation successor, and even the 3rd generation and 2nd generation successors. But in the entire core region, he had not seen any of the Origin Immortal Lord's 1st generation disciples. Wang Chong had almost believed that the Origin Immortal Lord's 1st generation disciple wasn't even here, but he had never imagined that this 1st generation walking corpse would appear before him in this manner. The Origin Immortal Lord's 2nd generation disciple had already reached the subtle realm, and when paired with the Origin Immortal Art, which was the strongest fighting force in the world, his fighting ability was unparalleled. The 2nd generation disciple was so powerful that not even Wang Chong and the evil emperor, who had captured the 3rd generation disciple, wanted to make an enemy out of him. And the 1st generation was even stronger than the 2nd generation, so one could easily imagine how terrifying his strength was. The king of foreign lands is truly intelligent. That person truly is the Origin Immortal Lord's 1st generation disciple. As the Origin Immortal Lord's 1st generation disciple, the trial he guards is not in the underground palace, but here. But what I need you to do is not to defeat the 1st generation disciple. Do you see that sword in front of him? I want you to take that sword for me. At this moment, Bagushidu's familiar voice rang out in Wang Chong's ear. Wang Chong looked carefully, and sure enough, Wang Chong saw a sword around 4 feet long in front of the 1st generation disciple. Nearly half of the sword was thrust into the ground. But at this moment, Wang Chong finally saw what was at the end of the chain. An altar. Wang Chong's body trembled as he recognized what it was. It was a massive altar floating in the air, constructed from gray stone. Whether it was the towering 1st generation disciple or the divine sword that Bagushidu spoke of, they were both standing in front of this altar. Wang Chong estimated that this massive altar weighed more than 10 tons, and its surface was covered in mysterious green inscriptions that exuded an extremely ancient aura. If he hadn't seen it with his own eyes, Wang Chong would have found it very difficult to believe that such a heavy object could float in the air, seemingly unaffected by the surrounding stellar winds. Buzz! In an instant, the dense fog surged in again, like a curtain slowly being drawn, and the huge altar, the 1st generation of zombies, and the 4-foot-long sword at the front were once again hidden in the fog. It was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. Both Wang Chong and Bagushidu stood there for a long time, saying nothing. Lord State Preceptor's martial arts are unparalleled. With your art of dark heaven, it should be easy for you to capture a sword. Wang Chong suddenly broke the silence, his voice tinged with derision. Ha! If only this matter were that simple, this king would not have troubled the king of foreign lands. Bagushidu grinned, paying no heed to Wang Chong's derision. His martial arts, temperament, and bearing had long ago reached a level of steel. How could he be shaken by a few words from Wang Chong? Moreover, Wang Chong's life was in his hands. No matter how angry he was, Bagushidu wouldn't be surprised. Bang! Bagushidu didn't wait for Wang Chong's question. He stepped forward, sending a thick stream of stellar energy through the chains. The chains shuddered under Bagushidu's feet, but at the same time, a metallic clanging resounded in his ears. Chapter 1540. At the same time, Wang Chong's mind was filled with alarm. He felt like he had been locked onto by thousands of sharp energies, and in just a moment he would be struck by a thunderous blow and torn to shreds. What is this? Wang Chong couldn't help but ask, blinking. The sword mound. You can also call it the Origin Immortal Sword Formation, Bagushidu said. All of you should have already encountered the 2nd generation. The second generation is also known for his swordsmanship, but what you don't know is that the second generation's swordsmanship originated from the first generation. This swordsmanship uses millions of broken swords, and treasured swords as its medium. When activated, it is like a torrential downpour of peerless power. The first generation's supreme intelligence and comprehension combined with the origin immortal lineage's techniques and his own fortuitous encounters allowed him to create this supreme sword art. This is also the highest sword Dao of the origin immortal lineage. As Bagushidu spoke, he extended his left hand and lightly waved it in front of him. In a flash, the mist in the area seemed to be stirred by an invisible hand, and a moment later, countless swords, broken swords, and swords appeared in front of Wang Chong like stars, extending from several dozen feet in front of the stone bridge into the depths of the mist. Even with Wang Chong's abilities, he wasn't able to tell how many broken swords there were in the area. All of these swords, broken swords were swimming in the void like a school of sharks in the sea. This was a grand and shocking sight that made one's hair stand on end, and one felt a fear and insignificance that came from the depths of one's heart. The first generation is different from the previous generations. My art of dark heaven has no effect on him. If I step into this area, I will immediately be attacked by the first generation. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. You don't think that you can easily obtain the origin immortal art by doing nothing, do you? You're the future state teacher of the Turks. Do you not even have the courage to face the first generation? Wang Chong snorted coldly and mocked. Since they were enemies, Wang Chong knew that Bagushidu would never let him go, so he naturally didn't need to be polite. If you knew what kind of person first gen is, you wouldn't say that. Bagushidu wasn't angry and he confidently spoke to Wang Chong. The origin immortal lord had 6 generations of disciples, but only the first generation was personally taught by him, and only the first generation actually met the origin immortal lord. Even this underground palace and checkpoint were built under the origin immortal lord's decree. My entire life was devoted to the origin immortal lord. I was both his disciple and his staunchest follower. It could be said that without the first generation, this origin immortal treasury would not exist. If you want to obtain the origin immortal art, you have to defeat the strongest generation. Bagushidu paused for a moment before continuing. But compared to Gen 1, what worries me the most is the sword in front of him. Sword? Wang Chong's eyes flashed in surprise. He had always believed that the sword was one with the first generation successor, or to put it more accurately, that the first generation successor controlled the sword. But from Bagushidu's tone, this didn't seem to be the case at all. That sword is extremely special. Anyone who steps on the chains and gets close to the sword will immediately feel like a dagger is pressed against their back. And the closer they get, the more intense this feeling becomes. Back then, state teacher Ishinishidu overcame all the obstacles in his path, taking a leisurely stroll through the cave. But when he encountered this divine sword, he was only able to take 10-some steps before his back became drenched in sweat and his face paled. This was even more taxing on his energy than fighting with someone else. If not for this, the state teacher would not have died here. I originally believed that after several hundred years, the power of this divine sword would have greatly weakened. But when I stepped on it, I realized that compared to Ishinishidu's memories, this divine sword was even stronger. I've only taken 7 steps forward. Halfway through his words, Bagushidu suddenly became wary and grinned. In short, the first generation successor's attack could still be blocked, but with that divine sword, everything is different. One man and one sword have formed the final barrier of the origin immortal treasury. If we don't think of a way to cross this barrier, we will obtain the origin immortal art and the origin immortal pill. The origin immortal pill? Wang Chong's eyes widened as he keenly sensed some new information from Bagushidu's words. The existence of the first-generation successor and that divine sword had already left Wang Chong very surprised. As for the immortal pill that Bagushidu spoke of, he had never heard of it before. For some reason, Bagushidu seemed to know much more than they did. There's no harm in telling you. Bagushidu faintly smiled, apparently certain that Wang Chong's death was certain and that Wang Chong would never be able to escape. Thus, he answered all of Wang Chong's questions before his death. Ever since the Earth Blood Cauldron returned to the solar holy mountain 200 years ago, it has gone through 6 or 7 generations of sect masters. Ishinishidu's memories have been passed down through these 7 generations. Each generation of the Earth Sect Master has done everything in his power to collect the secrets of the Origin Immortal Path, attempting to find the secret that caused one of the strongest grandmasters in the history of the Turks, Ishinishidu, to perish in the underworld. It was from that time that our Earth Sect put in 100 times the effort to gather information on the Sect Master. All the rumors of the sects, all the ancient texts, all the unofficial histories, whether they were related to the martial path or not, were collected. Hard work pays off. After expending the efforts of 7 generations of sect masters, we finally found records of the Origin Immortal Lord and his first-generation disciple. Moreover, we unexpectedly discovered that the Origin Immortal Lord had refined a top-class pill called the Origin Immortal Pill. This kind of pill can greatly increase a martial artist's strength, as well as cure all the flaws and diseases in a martial artist's body, as well as all injuries and illnesses. Most importantly, it can greatly increase a martial artist's potential. For those martial artists who have exhausted their potential and whose cultivation has reached the limit and can no longer advance, it can be raised to another level, allowing them to step into a higher realm. This pill is priceless. Ordinary people wouldn't care about it, but you should understand what it means for people like us who have exhausted our potential to obtain an Origin Immortal Pill. Bagushidu sternly said, making no attempt to conceal his anticipation and yearning. He was so dazzling that even the Lone Silence ancestor, Song Yuani, and the Black Yin ancestor, these titans of the martial arts world of the Central Plains, paled in comparison to him. But only Bagushidu knew that he had reached the limit of his cultivation. Besides the Origin Immortal Art, he also had to obtain the 2 remaining immortal pills that the Origin Immortal Lord had left in this cave abode. He had already determined the location of those 2 Origin Immortal pills, but there was no need for Wang Chong to know. Okay, that's all for now. King of Foreign Lands, please. Bagushidu faintly smiled, bowed, and gracefully gestured for Tang Wulin to enter. Wang Chong grimaced at this sight. King of Foreign Lands, the final trial of the Origin Immortal Treasury is fraught with danger, and anyone below the peak Great General level is doomed to die. But this king believes that what is certain death in the eyes of ordinary people is different for you. The Origin Immortal Formation was fraught with danger, and you opened the passage to the Origin Immortal Treasury that had not been opened for 200 years. Even those incredibly dangerous traps underground were not able to stop you. I must trouble you to break through the final trial of the Origin Immortal Treasury in this king's stead. As Bagushidu spoke, his right hand suddenly loosened its grip on Wang Chong's hand. The moment he withdrew his hand, Wang Chong felt the energy in his body loosen. A third of the energy that had been sealed had suddenly been sealed. Wang Chong had finally regained some stellar energy and was now able to protect himself. This was so sudden that even Wang Chong couldn't help but be taken aback, and for a moment, a hint of astonishment flashed through Wang Chong's eyes. A few moments later, Wang Chong sensed that part of Bagushidu's black stellar energy howling down, using a different method to seep into his dantian and the 6 acupuncture points around it. The dark energy in his dantian and the 6 acupoints faintly formed an even more powerful sealing art. This is a supreme forbidden art passed down from generation to generation in our solar holy mountain lineage, the Dark Moon's Blaze. It is also a forbidden art that only the Earth Sect Master has been able to grasp. Starting from now, no matter what tricks you use to escape, I only need to touch the seal to kill you. At this moment, Bagushidu's voice rang out in his ear. That's right. By the way, I've also added a drop of my heart's blood into this forbidden art. In other words, if I die, you won't be able to live either. Bagushidu faintly smiled and raised a finger. At this moment, Wang Chong could clearly see that a trickle of blood had appeared on Bagushidu's finger. The finger was the closest to the heart, and as the saying went, the 10 fingers were connected to the heart, so it was naturally easy to squeeze out a drop of heart's blood. In a flash, Wang Chang's face turned extremely unsightly, his heart sinking to the bottom of the lake. Bagushidu, you really did receive Ishinishidu's true legacy. Both of you are equally despicable. Wang Chong sternly said. Heh, the king of foreign lands overpraises me. Bagushidu chuckled, completely unperturbed. If I were you, I would think of a way to help me pass this trial and obtain that sword. Of course, if you vehemently refuse, I wouldn't mind killing you here and completing my deal with Osmish ahead of time. But I'm sure that you won't do that. After all, no matter how dangerous it is, there's still a sliver of hope, right? Bastard! Wang Chong coldly stared at Bagushidu, his mind seething with hatred. Bagushidu seemed to already have him in his grasp. No matter what he chose, Bagushidu wouldn't lose anything. On the other hand, just as Bagushidu had said, giving up had never been his style. No matter how difficult it was, he had to fight. Chapter 1541. But despite his anger, Wang Chong quickly calmed down. He turned his gaze and quickly looked forward. Even though he was being restrained, he could at least use a portion of his stellar energy, so his situation was much better than before. Can't you let me recover half of my strength? With this little bit of strength, I can't possibly get through the Origin Immortal Sword formation. Wang Chong suppressed his anger and sternly said, no. In any case, whether it's 30% or 50%, you can't stop the Origin Immortal Sword formation. Rather than wasting our efforts like this, what's the point of doing this? Bagushidu shook his head, his tone firm. Wang Chong only coldly snorted. He was only doing his best, and Bagushidu's refusal had been within his expectations. Calming himself down, Wang Chong began to examine the two thick chains at his feet. If he wanted to get through this trial and even obtain the Origin Immortal Art, these two chains would be crucial. Fortunately, they're made of 10,000-year-old cold steel and have been tempered thousands of times. Moreover, the surface of the chains is covered in many solidified inscriptions, so they won't break easily. Wang Chong recognized them at a glance. His forging of Wuzi steel swords had given him access to many materials, and 10,000-year-old cold steel was one of the most precious and top-class materials. Wang Chong could naturally recognize it at a glance. However, the 10,000-year-old cold steel used in the Origin Immortal Lord's Cave was different from normal. It was of a higher quality, purer, and could be considered one of the best materials. Moreover, the reinforcing inscriptions the Origin Immortal Lord had used on the chains were not the ordinary inscriptions used today, but ones from the spring and autumn era that were 100 times more effective. Just this point alone would make it difficult for even divine weapons to be damaged. But the next moment, when Wang Chong looked forward, his expression changed. After a few meters, the chain was densely dotted with mottled sword marks. Some of the sword marks were even several inches deep, almost cutting a small section of the chain. Further ahead, the mottled sword marks were a scene of desolation, and there were even more marks. The Origin Immortal Sword Formation. A thought flashed through Wang Chong's mind, and he immediately thought of the first generation controlling and setting up a huge sword formation here. Hiss! Wang Chong took a deep breath. First gen strength is simply too strong. I'm afraid that even my Wuzi steel sword won't be able to cut through this 10,000-year cold steel which is covered in ancient runes. However, first gen relied on his powerful sword chi to almost destroy these two chains. The gap between us is too great. With my current strength, I'm not his match at all. I'm afraid that once he steps onto the chain, the sword formation will activate, and he will definitely die. Wang Chong's heart was in turmoil. As these thoughts flashed through his mind, he quickly looked forward. With a wave of his sleeve, he didn't even need Bagushidu to do anything. Wang Chong swept away the sea of fog. Wang Chong had excellent control over his strength, and in the blink of an eye, the fog in front of him was gone. With the clattering of the chains, Wang Chong once more saw the mysterious altar floating in the air, the first-generation successor, and the mysterious sword thrust into the ground. Everything was blurry and indistinct, so distant that it seemed like another world. And in the fog, the first-generation successor was like a grim reaper from the underworld, savage and terrifying. and the mysterious sword thrust into the ground in front of the first-generation successor was even more indistinct. But when Wang Chong glanced at that sword, he felt a strange feeling in his heart. For some reason, this sword gave Wang Chong a strange feeling. This feeling was indescribable, and it only lasted for a moment before vanishing. How strange, Wang Chong frowned as he muttered to himself. But Wang Chong quickly came back to his senses. After a few moments of thought, he picked up a few stones from the stone bridge and flicked one of them toward the other side. Clang! A sharp sword light flashed through the air, and the pebble that Wang Chong had flicked out only managed to fly a short distance before it was cleaved in two and fell to the ground. Wang Chong's eyes flashed at this sight, and without the slightest hesitation, he flicked his finger, sending another stone flying. And then a second, a third. Wang Chong continued to pick up stones and throw them out, and then he watched as these stones flew in different directions and at different heights, sliced into even smaller pieces by the Origin Immortal Sword formation and dropped to the ground. Bagushidu coldly watched this entire process, not disturbing him in the slightest. His expression was calm and unperturbed. Only when Wang Chong flicked out those stones did his expression flicker. No. Once a stone enters the sword formation, it will be attacked. At most, it will be attacked by 56 blades, while at least 7. Wang Chong held a stone in his hand, his head slightly tilted back and his eyes closed as his mind rapidly worked. His psychic energy was several times stronger than before, and his calculation ability had also increased. Bagushidu could seal his energy, but he could not seal his psychic energy. In just a few moments, Wang Chong had used the stone in his hand to calculate many useful things. But even so, the situation was not optimistic. In his current state, he was practically doomed. If he couldn't think of a solution, he would die. Time slowly passed, and finally, a familiar voice rang out in his ear. King of foreign lands, time is limited. Please. Bagushidu faintly smiled. Although the Origin Immortal Lord had left behind many traps that would theoretically make it very difficult to get in, it was better to be safe than sorry. He could not allow Wang Chong to continue wasting time like this. As long as I can get in, state teacher shouldn't mind if I use a few tricks, right? At this moment, Wang Chong grinned, stood up, and turned to Bagushidu. Bagushidu was clearly taken aback, and then he waved his sleeve and chuckled. Heh, as long as you don't have any ideas about me, it's naturally fine. Whoosh. A few moments after Bagushidu spoke, 2 storms of energy appeared on the stone bridge behind them. A few moments later, the fog parted, revealing 2 powerful figures. It was Chief Wushang and Wang Chong's master, the evil emperor. Their eyes were cold as they glared at Bagushidu. If looks could kill, Bagushidu would have died thousands of times over. What? Do you want your master to go in your place? Bagushidu held his hands behind his back. Not only was he not afraid, he even chuckled and looked at Wang Chong with amusement. How could this be? Probably only your Eastern Turks, the Solar Holy Mountain, would do such a thing. Wang Chong waved his sleeve and faintly smiled. As if in response to his words, the fog behind the evil emperor and the chief of Wushang began to seethe. Thump thump thump. An energy even stronger than the evil emperor and the chief of Wushang strode out from the rear. Amidst the mist, those hollow and lifeless eyes that struck fear in the hearts of the onlookers landed on Bagushidu, the 3rd-generation successor of the Origin Immortal Lord. Earlier, in order to guard against any hidden dangers, Wang Chong had deliberately brought the 3rd-generation successor out of the passage. He hadn't expected for Bagushidu to take advantage of this opening and capture Wang Chong. The 3rd-generation successor didn't even have a chance to strike. Upon seeing the 3rd-generation successor, Bagushidu's faint smile finally vanished, and he no longer appeared as relaxed as he had been before. Bagushidu was still somewhat apprehensive of these disciples of the Origin Immortal Lord. Wang Chong, if I were you, I would be very careful, Bagushidu said as he stared at the imposing 3rd-generation successor. Heh, state teacher, are you afraid that I will use the 3rd-generation successor to attack? As he saw Bagushidu's body stiffen, Wang Chong suddenly smiled, his mind much more relaxed. Bagushidu had schemed against everyone, and even Wang Chong himself had fallen into his grasp. But in the end he still had things to worry about. Bagushidu's expression flickered, but he quickly smiled. King of foreign lands, you're thinking too much. Don't forget that you have the forbidden art of my earth sect, the dark moon's blaze, in your body. And you're using psychic energy to control the third-generation successor, right? If I use the dark moon's blaze, will you die faster or will I die faster? Will this walking corpse be able to move freely after you die and attack me as well? Buzz! Wang Chong said nothing, but a harsh light flashed through his eyes. This future state teacher of the Eastern Turkic Khaganate was far more difficult to deal with than he had imagined, and the dark moon's blaze in his body was still a hidden danger. Bagushidu, no one has ever threatened this old man like this. For abducting this old man's disciple, one day, I will make you and your earth sect pay the price. The demonic emperor old man suddenly said, his expression cold. Wang Chong had been abducted right under his nose. Although this had something to do with the fact that he had expended too much energy in the previous battles, this matter still left the evil emperor fuming with unprecedented rage. Ever since he had gone into seclusion, the evil and ruthless aura of the evil emperor had receded, but Bagushidu had succeeded in stimulating the darkest side of his heart. We'll see when the time comes. Chapter 1542. The evil emperor and the chief of Wushang had hateful expressions on their faces as they silently stood on the stone bridge. Behind them, the third-generation successor began to stride forward, making his way toward Wang Chong and Bagushidu. It was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. As the third-generation successor approached, Wang Chong's eyes flickered, and an irrepressible thought emerged in his mind. The final trial of the Origin Immortal Treasury was fraught with danger, and Bagushidu was basically forcing him to his death. Rather than being threatened by Bagushidu, it was better to use this chance to deal with Bagushidu. At the very least, he wouldn't be threatened. But the stone bridge was too narrow for his master and the chief of Wushang to get close, and Bagushidu was far too powerful. If they rashly attacked and failed, all their efforts would have been for naught. Moreover, even without Bagushidu, Wang Chong wouldn't have been able to avoid this final trial. Unlike Bagushidu, if he didn't obtain the Origin Immortal Art, he would be doomed. Buzz. As Wang Chong was thinking, he heard the clattering of metal. Bagushidu's black stellar energy was surging, and within this stellar energy were 3 small cauldrons covered in blood-colored inscriptions, each as heavy as a mountain. These cauldrons had spread out from Bagushidu's body and were guarding him from 3 different directions. A few moments later, Bagushidu's body began to swell like a bamboo shoot after the rain. In the blink of an eye, he had reached an astonishing level. Bagushidu had originally only been half a step into the subtle realm, only a sliver away from that level. But with the help of these 3 earthblood cauldrons, he had crossed that threshold, becoming even stronger and more terrifying than the third-generation successor. In a flash, Wang Chong paled, the last bit of thought in his mind dispelled. He was still no match for the future state teacher of the Turks. King of foreign lands, please. Bagushidu's voice rang out in Wang Chong's ear. His eyes were fixed on the other end of the mist, his expression relaxed. Wang Chong's mind raced, but in a split second, a smile appeared on his face. He was never one to blame the heavens and others. He only believed in his own strength. Since he couldn't beat them, he might as well settle down and think of a way to cross this natural chasm. As for Bagushidu, he could think of a way to deal with him once he survived. Buzz. Wang Chong shifted his gaze and quickly looked at the opposite side. The third generation and first generation both cultivate the Origin Immortal Art, and they share the same origin. I wonder if the third generation's energy will be of any use? In the end, only by challenging the Origin Immortal formation on the ground would one be able to find out what use the Origin Immortal formation had. Bzzz. Without the slightest hesitation, the third-generation king shot forward like a bolt of lightning, leaving a gust of wind in his wake as he charged past the pair. Bang! The third generation's foot stomped on the thick chain, causing it to fiercely shake. This simple action immediately attracted everyone's attention. Bagushidu's long brows rose in concern. I wonder if it's effective. Bagushidu quietly said to himself. Bagushidu did not dare to be careless about the thing that had caused Ishinishidu to suffer a crushing defeat. The moment the third generation's foot stepped forward, the entire trial began to change. Clang! A clear and melodious sword howl suddenly resounded by their ears, and it was a drawn-out sound that broke the silence of the entire space. A moment later, this sword hum multiplied into thousands of swords. Ripples appeared in the originally empty sea of mist, and suddenly, the cries of tens of thousands of swords rang out. The scene from when Bagushidu had challenged the trial once more took place. As far as Wang Chong could see, countless swords, broken swords, and damaged swords were like a school of sharks aimed at the third-generation successor at the end of the stone bridge. But unlike Bagushidu, these swords trembled and buzzed, but they did not attack. The warning was far stronger than an actual attack. It seems like Bagushidu was right. The first-generation successor's consciousness has already fused with the sword mound. He can even sense the third-generation successor's energy and send out a warning. Wang Chong's eyes flashed as he understood. As these thoughts flitted through his mind, Wang Chong began to move. Boom! The third-generation successor under Wang Chong's control shot forward like a cannonball. Immediately, with a shocking speed, he shot toward the opposite side of the chain. At the same time, there was a flash of golden light and a surge of astral energy. Hundreds of golden compasses shot out from the third-generation successor's body and turned into a golden fortress that surrounded him. With this barrier in place, the third-generation king immediately pushed the stellar energy in his body to the limit, and like a blazing sun, he charged forward with all his might. At this moment, both Wang Chong and Bagushidu began to focus their attention. This chain was only 700 or 800 meters long, and given the third-generation successor's strength, he should only need a few seconds to reach the other side. Success or failure would be determined by this one move. Boom! The third-generation successor took another step forward, his foot landing on the thick chain and causing it to violently shake. And it was this action that immediately triggered the rage of the countless flying swords in the sword tomb. A single stone stirred up 1,000 ripples, and the number of flying swords in the sea of fog rapidly increased. There was the sound of metal clanging, and in the next moment, there was a wild gale as 10 times the number of flying swords from before shot toward the third-generation king, shining with dazzling golden light. More flying swords were gathering from all directions. In the blink of an eye, tens of thousands of swords, broken swords, and damaged swords shined with a golden light as they formed an unprecedented storm that spun and shot toward the third-generation king. This was the first time Wang Chong had seen someone capable of controlling so many flying swords at the same time. Each flying sword was as heavy as a mountain, and they flew down like a torrential storm. Boom! 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 In the blink of an eye, the third-generation king's figure was engulfed by the countless flying swords. Bush! Bush! The fog and golden light greatly hindered Wang Chong's vision, and the powerful psychic seal in the air made it impossible for Wang Chong to use his psychic energy to probe around. But standing at the end of the stone bridge, Wang Chong could clearly see the 2 thick chains beneath his feet vibrating at an unprecedented rate. The clanking of the chains rang out incessantly, and in the blink of an eye, the third-generation successor zombie had fallen into an extremely dangerous situation. The pull of this abyss was so powerful that not even the third-generation successor could fly into the air. The 2 narrow chains were constantly vibrating, ready to throw the successor off at any moment. If he fell into the abyss, he would be doomed. Impossible! At this moment, a familiar voice rang out in Wang Chong's ear. At some point, Bagushidu had walked up to stand next to Wang Chong, his hair dancing in the wind. But he paid no attention to Wang Chong. His attention was completely focused on the third-generation successor, the golden light drawing away all his attention. These walking corpses only have incomplete souls in their bodies, and they're already dead, so they're not affected by the divine swords. In other words, the third-generation successor doesn't need to worry about anything else in this battle. As long as he can defeat the first-generation successor, he can reach the other side. More importantly, he's a successor of the Origin Immortal Realm, so he'll suffer far fewer attacks than we do. Bagushidu's eyes shone with excitement. He had originally taken Wang Chong hostage as a test, and it was also for the sake of his deal with Osmishkagan. In any case, he wouldn't suffer any losses, but it now appeared that he had made the correct decision. The third-generation successor had already surpassed him and Ishinishidu, the patriarch of the Earth sect. Bagushidu had just seen a sliver of hope, but a moment later, what happened in the fog obliterated that hope. Buzz! As the third-generation successor advanced along the chain, using the Golden Compass Fortress that could nullify all techniques to fend off the rain of swords, the flying swords in the air began to change. As the pair watched, the Origin Immortal Lord's vast origin energy immediately surged into the thousands of flying swords in the air. In a flash of light, one of the flying swords shooting toward the third-generation successor suddenly began to blaze with light. A hazy light rose from the tip of the sword for more than half a foot, exuding a sharpness that seemed to be able to pierce through metal. Sword Chi! Wang Chong's heart trembled and he grimaced. He had the art of god and demon obliteration, so he was extremely familiar with this sort of sword Dao. There were as many flying swords in the air as there were hairs on an ox, and if each one could spit out sword Chi, the power of this sword formation would be unimaginable. As if responding to Wang Chong's foreboding, 1 sword, 2 swords, 3 swords, in just a few seconds, the sea of swords, broken swords in the air began to spit out sword Chi and explode toward the third-generation successor, their power on a completely different level. Boom boom boom. The flying swords exploded, and the third-generation successor's speed immediately dropped. Not only that, but in the face of the sword Chi attacks, the third-generation king was in unprecedented danger. Not only was he unable to advance, but he was also pushed back, almost falling off his chains. It's about time to test the third generation's power. Chapter 1543. If Wang Chong had been forced to do this by Bagushidu, Wang Chong's attention was now completely focused on crossing the chasm. If he wanted to obtain the Origin Immortal Art, he had to overcome this chasm. Buzz! In the next moment, the third-generation successor stood in the middle of the chain, several hundred meters away from the stone bridge. He extended a hand, and the radiant 33 heavens immediately gathered together into a massive golden halberd. With a casual blow, the third-generation successor unleashed a torrent of golden energy that, combined with the power of the golden halberd, instantly pulverized the several dozen swords in front of him. The third-generation successor turned around and unleashed another blow. Before the several dozen flying swords could even get close, they were pulverized by the tyrannical Origin Immortal Stellar Energy. But this was only the beginning. With the halberd in hand, the third-generation successor's momentum soared, and he took the initiative to attack the tens of thousands of flying swords around him. Boom! Wave after wave of Daluo's astral energy sprayed out. The astral energy rumbled and even turned into the shape of dragons and tigers, clashing with the flying swords in the air with their fists. The Origin Immortal Lord's disciple had once more displayed his formidable fighting power. Even though he was facing a massive number of flying swords in this extremely unfavorable environment, the third-generation successor was still able to attack and defend. The swords, broken swords, and damaged swords in the air were destroyed by the third-generation successor, the shards and chains constantly brushing past him and falling into the abyss below. Impossible! Was it broken just like that? Or was I just looking in the wrong direction this entire time? Bagushidu muttered to himself. For a moment, he didn't dare to believe that things had gone so smoothly. On the other side, Wang Chong also slightly frowned. Although the current situation was advantageous to him, Wang Chong instinctively felt that the situation was not so simple. The first-generation successor was stronger than the second-generation successor, and he had single-handedly constructed all the mechanisms in the underground palace. The first-generation successor could not possibly pass this trial so easily. Just as this thought flashed across Wang Chong's mind, there was a sudden change in the distance. Sandame's repeated advances and attacks on the flying swords in the air seemed to have finally angered Shizai. Boom! There was an earth-shattering sound, and in the next moment, a huge crack appeared in the air above the chain, and a terrifying energy surged out from the void. countless golden particles mixed with the mist and attached themselves to the thousands of flying swords in the void. In just a short period of time, the flying swords gave off a completely new feeling. They had actually become even more powerful and dangerous than before. Subtle realm. Wang Chong stood on the stone bridge at the back and watched coldly. He felt it deeply. In that instant, he sensed a familiar aura in the air. It was the power of the nuance realm. However, this power was even more terrifying than the second king in the underground palace. If the second king was a man of steel, then the first king was a giant. Even more frightening was that the subtle realm for ordinary martial artists only raised their strength to a higher level, but the first-generation successor's unique form had completely changed the definition of the subtle realm. The third-generation successor was now facing thousands of subtle realm flying swords, a power that would make any martial artist shrink back and tremble in fear. It's finally here. The nearby Bagushidu also sensed this change. He was much stronger than Wang Chong, so he was able to sense it much more deeply. Wang Chong could only sense the subtle realm energy surging through the air, but Bagushidu could sense that a massive gate had opened in the depths of spacetime. This transcendent energy, more powerful than any martial artist in the world, surged in like massive waves and was absorbed by the origin immortal sword formation. It's this energy. Back then, Ishinishidu chased after it for 10 days and 10 nights, all the way to this place. In the end, he died here. Only by comprehending this power and combining it with the power of our Earth-sex dark radiant heaven will we be able to comprehend it and reach another realm. Bagushidu's face flickered, and he could no longer maintain his composure. His clothes began to tremble in the mist, making him seem completely different from before. But Wang Chong had no idea that the battle had reached its most intense moment, and the first-generation successor was completely intent on killing the third-generation successor. Before one wave had even settled, the first-generation successor had opened a space-time passage. When all the flying swords were advanced to the microscopic level, the golden light was dazzling. In the thick mist, countless broken golden lights suddenly floated up from the bottom of the chain. A single glance caused Wang Chong and Bagushidu to grimace. The densely packed, scale-like fragments of golden light were actually countless fragments of the longsword. These fragments were all the flying swords that had been shattered in the battle between the third-generation successor and the first-generation successor. Not only had the third-generation successor failed to destroy these flying swords, he had only made the sword mound even more dangerous. Clang. Before Wang Chong and Bagushidu could react, countless flying swords gathered together in a dazzling golden light. In the next moment, a huge sword that was over 300 feet long flashed through the air like a bolt of lightning. In an instant, it struck the third-generation successor on the chain with the power of a thunderbolt. Even the third-generation successor seemed insignificant in the face of this enormous energy. Not good. Wang Chong had an extremely ill foreboding. There was no time to think, and all Wang Chong could do was control the third-generation successor to leap forward with all his strength. Less than half a second later, the third-generation successor seemed to have been struck by a bolt of lightning and vanished into the mist. The battle ended, and everything returned to peace. The surrounding fog gathered, and in the void, the tens of thousands of broken swords lost their target. Gradually, the light on their swords faded, and they slowly dispersed into the void around the chain. One by one, they lay dormant and disappeared. Walala, the chains swayed, the sound was loud and clear, but on the stone bridge behind, there was only silence. Wang Chong and Bagushidu stood side by side, silent for a long time. Just like that, the third-generation successor had died. From start to finish, Wang Chong had controlled the third-generation successor to advance, even at the last second. But in the end he had still failed. What a pity! Such a powerful helper, such a powerful fighting force, was lost for nothing. Bagushidu quickly came back to his senses and smiled at Wang Chong. But Bagushidu's words came to a sudden halt. Next to him, Wang Chong had squatted down, his expression focused as he drew a finger across the stone bridge. Not even Bagushidu could understand the strange symbols and marks he was drawing. This is... Bagushidu frowned and immediately shut his mouth, standing behind Wang Chong as he watched. At this moment, Wang Chong was so focused that he had completely forgotten about Bagushidu. His eyes were half closed, and his mind was constantly replaying the battle between the third-generation successor and the first-generation successor. The entire battle, every single detail, from the beginning to the end, all appeared in his mind, big and small. Although the third-generation successor had been killed by the sword formation, Wang Chong's sacrifice had not been for naught. At the very least, Wang Chong had gained a great deal of information that he had not known before. More importantly, when Wang Chong had controlled the third-generation successor, he had also seen it from the third-generation successor's point of view. He had gained all the experience of fighting the first-generation successor head-on. Not even Bagushidu had experienced this sort of thing. It's not advisable to use brute force. The first-generation successor only used 60% of his strength against the third-generation successor, and this is entirely because he is the successor of the origin immortal realm. If it had been anyone else, the first-generation successor would have been at least 40% stronger. This isn't something that any one of us here can deal with. Wang Chong closed his eyes and slightly raised his head, his mind constantly calculating. Thus, if he wanted to obtain the origin immortal art, he could only do it through wits, not brute force. Crucially, he had to find the pattern of the first-generation successor's attacks. No matter how powerful and intelligent the first-generation successor was, he was still dead, and his mind was bound to be extremely weak after nearly 1,000 years. This was the crux of the problem. The first-generation successor's attacks had a pattern. At the very least, this was what Wang Chong had learned through the third-generation successor's eyes, and it was his greatest harvest. Just what is it? Wang Chong muttered to himself, his mind in turmoil. The third-generation successor was already half a step into the subtle realm, and when combined with the world's #1 origin immortal art, his fighting power was almost on par with the initial realm Kuteba, perhaps even a little stronger. Not even the third-generation successor could contend against 60% of the first-generation's attacks, much less Wang Chong himself. If he could not find the first-generation successor's pattern of attacks, recklessly stepping onto the chains would mean certain death. The air was still, and the air was cold as it flowed across the stone bridge. Bagushidu stood with his hands held behind his back, his expression indifferent and unhurried. While the third-generation successor was present, he had still had some misgivings. Now that the third-generation successor was gone, Wang Chong's life was even more in his hands. There's no rush. Take your time to think. At the very least, you have enough time before the others come in. Bagushidu faintly smiled, exuding a scholarly air. He seemed forgiving, but this was actually his final ultimatum. But at this moment Wang Chong did not care, nor did he care. What is it? Just what is it? Chapter 1544. Countless battle scenes replayed in his mind in a bizarre manner, reorganizing themselves. All of the long swords, the broken swords, the damaged swords, and even the energy that the first-generation expert used to activate the minute subtlety at the end appeared in his mind. Moreover, in a manner that the martial artists of this world could not understand, he dissected and calculated them. Bystanders, including Bagushidu, could only see these scenes, but in Wang Chong's mind, these scenes had transformed into countless numbers. In this aspect, it was somewhat similar to how Wang Chong had used his immense psychic energy to break the origin immortal formation, but it was even stronger now. Time slowly passed, and Wang Chong didn't have much time left. Wang Chong's current strength was simply too weak. He once more recalled the battle between the third-generation successor and the first-generation successor. Origin. What a powerful sword formation. It's practically endless, and the more I attack, the stronger it gets, Wang Chong mentally sighed. But a moment later, as his gaze swept over the sword mound shrouded in thick fog, Wang Chong's body trembled as he remembered something. No. The origin immortal sword formation, the origin immortal art. As if remembering something, Wang Chong's eyes suddenly brightened. Lowering his head, he extended a strand of sword chi from his finger and began to draw on the stone bridge once more. With the help of the lanterns on both sides of the bridge, Wang Chong was able to draw much more clearly this time. His finger moved to the east and then to the west. Slowly, as Wang Chong drew more and more lines on the stone bridge, it became clearer and clearer. It was a crude origin immortal symbol, just like the symbol on the chest of the sixth-generation successor, though there were some subtle differences. Buzz. Finally, his finger left a crude mark on the stone bridge. Wang Chong's eyes suddenly became clear, and a smile appeared on his face. Lifting his head, he looked ahead. The other side of the stone bridge was still covered in mist, making it difficult to see anything. However, for Wang Chong, he had already seen something different. This was the true operating principle of the origin immortal sword formation. Gran Luo. In both power and form, this sword formation was unlike any other supreme art that Wang Chong had seen before. But at its core, this sword formation shared the same essence as the origin immortal formation that Wang Chong had seen before, the origin immortal formation. As expected, the first generation's cultivation has surpassed all the previous origin immortal successors. He actually took the origin immortal art and the origin immortal formation, these two completely different things, and created the origin immortal sword formation. But the source of all three is exactly the same. Wang Chong's eyes flickered, and his mind immediately became clear. If it were anyone else, even if they had seen some clues from the origin immortal sword formation, they would not have been able to use them in such a short time to break the formation. But Wang Chong was different, because he knew the origin immortal art's mantra. Even though it was only the first layer, Wang Chong had already gained an enormous enlightenment. And while Wang Chong was controlling the third-generation successor to fight, he had also gained a thorough understanding of how the origin immortal stellar energy flowed in the successor's body. Just this isn't enough. But a few moments later, Wang Chong's brow furrowed, a shadow flitting across his brow. If he had recovered all his strength, or even reached a higher level, Wang Chong would have chosen to fight to the death, but he had been greatly weakened, and 2/3 of his energy had been sealed. Even though he had vaguely understood the secrets of the origin immortal sword formation, recklessly jumping onto it would still result in death. Wang Chong raised his head, his gaze once more focused on the 2 chains and the first-generation successor and his divine sword. The chance of death is too high, almost 70%. Just how can I get across? Wang Chong muttered to himself, his brow tightly furrowed. The information he currently had was far from enough, and Wang Chong's mind was rapidly turning as he tried to think of a way to safely cross the origin immortal sword formation. But just what should I do? Wang Chong's brow furrowed deeper and deeper. At present, his greatest advantage was that, like the third-generation successor, he had the same origin immortal stellar energy in his body. But even the stronger third-generation successor had fallen from the chains, so Wang Chong didn't think that he could easily avoid it. Time slowly passed, and Wang Chong's eyes remained closed as he fell into thought. As Wang Chong's brow furrowed even tighter, a cold wind blew past, causing the mist in the abyss to begin to seethe once more. At this moment, Wang Chong heard a clattering at his ear. It was the sound of the chains shaking. Buzz. As this thought flashed through his mind, Wang Chong's eyes brightened as he thought of something, and his brow slowly relaxed. After once more examining the thick fog and abyss, Wang Chong closed his eyes and began to think for a long time. Finally, he slowly stood up. "Are you ready?" Bagushidu's voice rang out in his ear. He had been observing Wang Chong this entire time, and none of Wang Chong's movements could escape his eyes. "What does it matter if I'm ready or not? Nothing will change if I stay here any longer. And if I stay a little longer, will you let me go?" Wang Chong indifferently said without turning his head. Bagushidu only faintly smiled and said nothing. Ignoring Bagushidu, Wang Chong took in a deep breath and took a small step forward. Although his words were indifferent, the slight tension in his body revealed his true state. This place was fraught with danger, and every step could doom him to eternal damnation. Not even Wang Chong had much confidence in his next course of action. But if he stuck his head out, he would die, and if he shrank his head, he would die. Wang Chong had no other choice. Buzz. A moment later, as Bagushidu watched, Wang Chong stepped forward, placing his foot on the thick chain in front of him. Bagushidu was stunned by this sudden action. He had seen Wang Chong scribble on the ground and then ponder, and at the end, a faint smile on his lips. Bagushidu believed that Wang Chong had found a solution. But Bagushidu had never imagined that Wang Chong's solution would be so simple and crude. This was no different from seeking death. King of foreign lands, Bagushidu grimaced, and he subconsciously wanted to call out to Wang Chong. If Wang Chong just walked over, Bagushidu wouldn't be able to find any information on him. But at this moment, Wang Chong seemed to have put Bagushidu to the back of his mind and heard nothing. Before Bagushidu could react, Wang Chong's other foot stepped on another chain. It's over! Bagushidu's heart chilled at this sight. The moment he left the range of the stone bridge, the sword formation would immediately be activated and the first-generation successor would attack. With Wang Chong's meager strength, he wouldn't even be able to last 1 second before being killed. Bang! The moment Wang Chong's last foot stepped on the chain, massive waves of energy surged through the air. Sword chi whistled through the air, and in a few short moments, tens of thousands of swords, broken swords exploded out of the mist and shot toward Wang Chong with the momentum of a thunderbolt, the exact same momentum as when he had dealt with the third-generation successor. Swish, swish, swish. Just when it seemed like Wang Chong was about to be pierced by the 10,000 swords and die on the spot, something unexpected occurred. Wang Chong's body exploded with golden light, and then the origin immortal stellar energy, identical to the third-generation successors, began to spread across his body. At the same time, Wang Chong lowered his body, and the energy he exuded began to change, going from strong to weak, from weak to nothing. Finally, to Bagushidu's shock, Wang Chong fused with the thick chain beneath him. At this moment, Wang Chong had used his immense psychic energy to transform himself into a chain. Even though Bagushidu had made all sorts of preparations and even imagined Wang Chong's fate of being pierced by 10,000 swords, this scene still far surpassed his expectations. For the first time, Bagushidu was caught off guard, and deep shock appeared in his eyes. But even more shocking had yet to come. As Wang Chong completed this series of transformations, the storm of flying swords in the air seemed to lose their target and came to a sudden halt. More than 90% of the flying swords froze in the air, while the remaining swords seemed to sense Wang Chong's presence, but their speed had dropped by more than 10 times. This small change had instantly reduced the danger that Wang Chong was facing to an inconceivable level. In the face of these flying swords, Wang Chong was like a leopard, his body leaping forward and immediately flying toward the other end of the chain. The flying swords brushed past Wang Chong's back, and Wang Chong managed to narrowly avoid this attack. How could this be? Bagushidu was dumbstruck. He had imagined 1,000 scenarios in which Wang Chong would be pierced through, but he had never imagined that things would turn out like this. The scene before him had completely escaped his control, and not even Bagushidu could predict what would happen. What a powerful king of foreign lands! No wonder Osumis and the surrounding kingdoms can't eat or sleep in peace. Bagushidu couldn't help but sigh as he looked at Wang Chong, whose aura had already fused with the chains on the stone bridge. The first-generation successor's psychic energy had already become one with the countless flying swords in the air. Anyone who stepped into this area would trigger the first-generation successor's psychic energy and suffer a lightning-fast attack. Bagushidu was skilled in the art of the dark heaven and could fool the heavens, but he could not fool the first-generation successor's mind. The third-generation successor and the first-generation successor shared the same origin and cultivated the same origin immortal art, but the first-generation successor had still sensed them and thrown them into the abyss. Chapter 1545. The first-generation origin immortal sword formation had attacked all the martial artists who had entered the area, but it had not attacked the 2 long chains. The mottled sword marks on the chains were merely the result of the intruder's unintentional damage. Bagushidu had never imagined that Wang Chong would target these 2 chains, but this truly was a flaw right in front of their eyes. Even though he was an enemy, Bagushidu had to admit that Wang Chong truly did have an outstanding and astonishing ability. To use psychic energy to imitate the energy of other people, stones, chains, and other inanimate objects, required more than just powerful psychic energy. Wang Chong had been able to do this because his psychic energy had already reached an unimaginable level of materialization. Based on Bagushidu's knowledge, no one in the world could do this. But no matter what Bagushidu thought, Wang Chong was already advancing along the thick chains like a sloth. Even though Wang Chong had succeeded in disguising his aura as a chain, allowing him to dodge the first round of attacks from the Origin Immortal Sword formation and the first generation's edge, Wang Chong was still very cautious, not daring to be careless. Based on the unique characteristics of the Origin Immortal Sword formation, there are 53 blind spots along the chains, places where the Origin Immortal Sword formation can't attack. As long as I follow these 53 blind spots, the attacks will be kept to a minimum. The threat won't be too great. If I jump forward, I'll be able to avoid the vast majority of the dangers. But between blind spots, as I jump, I'll still be attacked by flying swords. This is the most dangerous moment. Wang Chong lowered his body and looked ahead, his mind in turmoil. His movements just now had been as smooth as flowing water. In the eyes of others, it had been as easy as breathing, but to Wang Chong, this was far from the case. The flying sword in the air followed him like a shadow and did not disperse, and the chain beneath him was also constantly shaking back and forth. Wang Chong felt like a small boat in the middle of a raging sea, ready to capsize at any moment. The slightest mistake would result in his death. Just 30% of his strength wasn't enough for him to deal with everything around him. More importantly, Wang Chong was well aware that this situation wouldn't last for long. The first-generation successor's remnant consciousness was much more complete than the others, and he was only confused and unable to recognize himself. But as time passed, his consciousness would awaken more and more, and eventually, he would be able to distinguish himself from the chains and kill himself. I have at most the time it takes for an incense stick to burn before the first generation's consciousness can see through my disguise, so before that, I have to think of a way to get there as soon as possible. Wang Chong quietly said to himself. Ding, 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 ding. The sound of flying swords trembling echoed through the air for a long time. Although many of the flying swords couldn't lock onto Wang Chong, they seemed to sense Wang Chong's approximate position, and so they constantly vibrated near Wang Chong. This was the result of having a broken consciousness. After all, the first-generation successor had been dead for 1,000 years, and his consciousness was incomplete. Wang Chong had disguised himself as a metal chain. This was something he had never expected. In the past hundreds and thousands of years, there had never been a martial artist who had done this. Without any hesitation, Wang Chong's body shot forward like a monkey. In a flash, he crossed several dozen feet and immediately arrived at the third blind spot on the metal chain. Clang, clang, clang. Just as Wang Chong shot forward, a series of metallic clangs rang out from behind him. Countless flying swords struck the metal chain by a hair's breadth, causing countless sparks to fly. Wang Chong's earlier calculations had proved effective. Countless flying swords, suffused with golden light, floated in the air like dark clouds, creating a stunning sight. But the number of flying swords that actually fell to attack Wang Chong was incredibly small. This was on a completely different level from the attacks the third-generation successor had faced. Bagushidu had long since been rendered speechless by this sight. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Clang, clang, clang. Countless flying swords fell, but Wang Chong dodged them one by one. Wang Chong was like a leopard cat as he flew through the air. As he watched Wang Chong rapidly advance, Bagushidu slowly began to frown, as if he had encountered some problem that he couldn't understand. Strange, Bagushidu muttered to himself as he subconsciously raised his head. Up ahead, mist surged. The mist here was thick and didn't scatter, reaching an astonishing level. Nothing could be seen. But Bagushidu's eyes were fixed in that direction as if he was waiting for something. He had tried before, and if the final barrier were so simple that all he needed to do was deal with the first-generation successor, he would have already started. No matter how terrifying the first-generation successor was, he would have done everything in his power to reach the other side. But this was not the case. 200 years ago, these flying swords had not been the only thing that had stopped Ishinishidu. 200 years ago, it was not just the first-generation successor that had stopped him and made him apprehensive. But for some reason, Wang Chong seemed to be completely unaffected by that thing as he climbed the chains. Buzz! While he was pondering this question, the fog on the other side suddenly rippled, and then a flash of light accompanied by an energy that Bagushidu was familiar with. It's begun! Bagushidu's heart thumped, and he immediately turned to Wang Chong. His expression was solemn, and he was much more focused than he had been in the past. The danger has only just begun. Whoosh! The chains began to sway, but this time, there was a subtle difference. At the same time, the highly nervous Wang Chong began to sense that something was amiss. Buzz! Without any warning, a burst of energy pierced through the fog and locked onto Wang Chong. Wang Chong's body sank as if a 1,000-gene cauldron was pressing down on him, and he paled. What's going on here? Wang Chong came to a sudden stop and raised his head to the sky. Almost subconsciously, Wang Chong believed that this was the work of the first-generation successor and the origin immortal sword formation. But a moment later, Wang Chong sensed that something was wrong. This energy was completely different from that of the first-generation successor and his flying swords. Moreover, Wang Chong's ability to disguise himself as a chain had no effect on this energy. Moreover, this was only the beginning. Even though Wang Chong had stopped, the energy did not stop. However, that aura was far from stopping. In just an instant, that aura increased exponentially at a shocking speed. At the start, Wang Chong only felt his shoulders sink as if a 1,000-gene cauldron was pressing down on him, but a few moments later, this 1,000-gene cauldron turned into steel and then into a mountain, and it was still growing heavier and heavier at a terrifying rate. This energy was acting on every cell in Wang Chong's body, pressing down on him. Swoosh! There was a massive boom as the swaying chains were suddenly pulled straight down, forming a massive V in the air. All the pressure was concentrated on Wang Chong's body, causing Wang Chong's body to creak, the veins on his arms bulging, and the stellar energy in his body rumbling. And this energy continued to multiply. In the blink of an eye, Wang Chong's face had turned red. Clang clang clang. Before Wang Chong could react, the sword chi above his head buzzed. This sudden pressure caused Wang Chong's perfect psychic energy disguise to waver, revealing a flaw. Meanwhile, those thousands of swords, and broken swords that had lost their targets immediately began to howl toward Wang Chong like sharks that had smelled blood. Chonga! Cries of alarm came from the distance, the voices of the evil emperor and the chief of Wushang. Two figures appeared at the end of the stone bridge and began to advance. Retreat! At this moment, Bagushidu's voice came from up ahead, chilling to the bone. No one is allowed to interfere. If any of you dare to interfere, I won't even need your help. I'll kill him on the spot. Bagushidu's eyes were sharp and his expression callous. There was no trace of his previous elegant demeanor. The last part was extremely important to him, and he needed to learn as much as he could from Wang Chong. No one was allowed to interfere during this process. The footsteps behind him suddenly stopped, and in front of him, Wang Chong's situation had reached an extremely dangerous level. The origin immortal sword. According to the information that Bagushidu and the Earth sect had gathered, the divine sword stabbed in front of the first-generation successor was the treasure that the origin immortal lord had left in his cave. This treasure was the most valuable thing in this cave, and to a certain extent, it was even more valuable than the origin immortal art. Besides the origin immortal art, this was also the treasure that Bagushidu had to obtain. As long as he obtained this treasure, he could take it back to the Earth sect and use it as the treasure of the sect, passing it down to the next generation. But he would not tell Wang Chong any of this. The origin immortal sword was extremely powerful, and it probably contained the most important martial experience of the origin immortal lord's life. It was definitely not one bit inferior to the Earthblood Cauldron. But obtaining it would not be easy. Anyone who approached in hopes of obtaining the origin immortal sword would have to endure a dreadful pressure. Although Wang Chong's psychic concealment art could fool the already dead and half-conscious generation, it was not enough to deal with the origin immortal sword that guarded the rear. Life and death will be decided now. Bagushadu said to himself as he gazed at the taut chains. At this moment, Wang Chong was like an object weighing several thousand tons hanging from a chain. His energy was already leaking out, and the thousands of flying swords were surging toward him. Chapter 1546. Bagushadu took in a deep breath and began to circulate his stellar energy. This was a sign that he was ready to strike. Once Wang Chong failed, he would have to do it himself. But no matter what, he had already made a deal with Osmishkagan. What a pity! Bagushadu said to himself as he gazed at Wang Chong. Bagushadu's words were correct. Wang Chong was in an extremely perilous situation. Golden light flashed as swords, broken swords, and mangled swords rained down from the sky. Boom! Wang Chong gathered all the strength in his body and leaped into the air. In the next moment, he heard the sound of a collision. It was an ear-piercing sound. Tens of thousands of flying swords struck the chain behind Wang Chong, creating a shower of sparks. The chain, which was made of millennium cold iron and covered with ancient talismans, was directly split open. There were countless gaps on it, and some of them were even several inches deep. It was a ghastly sight to behold. Although Wang Chong had managed to escape this disaster, his body was drenched in cold sweat. The small amount of stellar energy in his body immediately began to dwindle. With no time to hesitate, Wang Chong hurriedly calmed his mind and repaired the gap, once more disguising himself as the giant chain. But even though he had escaped this disaster, an even greater danger was approaching. Wang Chong's body was still getting heavier, and the invisible pressure on his body had increased by 2 to 3 times, and it was still showing no signs of stopping. Not only that, Wang Chong's psychic energy was being consumed at an astonishing rate. Every moment was like a high-level battle of psychic energy. In the thick fog, the flying swords were constantly vibrating and buzzing as they circled around. Although he had lost track of Wang Chong's energy, the first-generation successor had already grasped the rough range of Wang Chong's location. With just a little more information, he would be able to locate him and kill him in one fell swoop. However, at this moment, Wang Chong could no longer care about that. For Wang Chong, a greater crisis was approaching. Buzz! The air trembled, and in the blink of an eye, Wang Chong felt an immense pressure bearing down on him. Even with Wang Chong's ability to materialize his mind, he couldn't help but feel insignificant at this moment. It was like an ordinary person without the strength to even truss a chicken, facing those peerless experts who could shatter mountains with just a wave of their hands. Impossible! In an instant, Wang Chong's expression abruptly changed. It was also at this moment that Wang Chong's vision spun. In just an instant, layers of fog appeared before his eyes, and Wang Chong saw the divine sword stuck in the altar. It was different from the flying swords that Wang Chong had seen before. This divine sword was majestic, solemn, and sacred. In Wang Chong's eyes, it was as majestic as a mountain. It's that sword! Wang Chong's heart trembled slightly, and he immediately understood. Buzz! At the same time that Wang Chong saw that sword, there was a flash of light, and the sword suddenly changed, becoming incomparably sharp. Immediately after, boom, there was an earth-shattering sound, and the mountain-like sword suddenly chopped down toward Wang Chong. Pooh! The sword chi passed through his body, and in that instant, Wang Chong's whole body trembled, and he suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood. Wang Chong's spiritual energy had already reached a substantial state, and there were few who could match it in the world. And with just one sword, Wang Chong immediately seemed to have suffered a heavy blow. In just an instant, Wang Chong's face suddenly became pale, and his clothes were all wet, as if he had been fished out of water. Not only that, golden light burst out in the sky, and countless flying swords shot down like a waterfall. Wang Chong jumped, and this jump looked extremely weak, completely not as smooth as before. Clang, clang, clang. Countless flying swords brushed past the chains, and even though Wang Chong had already used all his strength, he was still hit in the right leg by the flying swords. Pooh, piu, piu, blood splattered. How could this be? Wang Chong suddenly raised his head, his eyes full of shock. This sword had not only severed a third of his psychic energy, It had also severed half of his cultivation. This single sword had made Wang Chong's situation even worse, and he was now in an extremely dangerous situation. But that sword, Wang Chong looked across from him, but he could see nothing but the roiling fog, only a chill. But Wang Chong could clearly sense that the divine sword Bagushidu spoke of was standing on the altar at the end of the chains. From start to finish, that divine sword had not moved, but this sword gave Wang Chong a feeling that it was even more terrifying than the flying swords above his head. The flying swords could attack the body, but this sword was aimed at the soul, obliterating the soul. At this moment, Wang Chong suddenly understood why Bagushidu had feared this divine sword, and why the state teacher of the Turks, Ishinishidu, had resisted the dragon beasts, the nightmare beasts, the traps, and the attacks of the sixth-generation walking corpses, had died to this divine sword in the end. It was impossible to dodge an attack on the mind and soul. Buzz. As this thought flashed through his mind, Wang Chong's vision darkened, and his soul was once more swept into that world of consciousness. In the dusky world, Wang Chong could see nothing but the roiling fog on both sides of him, and that divine sword once more towered over him like a towering mountain, ready to slash down at him at any moment. Wang Chong's heart tightened, and his face paled. But at this moment, the space around him began to twist and churn. Two words appeared in front of Wang Chong's eyes: fog. Desire obstruction. Wang Chong froze at the sight of these words, a look of confusion on his face, and then he seemed to think of something, a pensive look appearing in his eyes. It's useless. On the distant stone bridge, Bagushidu's robe flapped in the wind. He could clearly see the change in Wang Chong, and he knew that he was thinking of a countermeasure. But Bagushidu only shook his head, looking at Wang Chong like he was a dead man. The Origin Immortal Sword follows one strike after another. Once it starts, it can't end. The only way is if you retreat from the chains from the very beginning. Not even someone of Ishinishidu's talent was able to stop it, let alone someone else. King of foreign lands, you are also a rare genius of the Tang dynasty. Alas, you will still die here. This trial is truly difficult to pass. Bagushidu mentally sighed. It wasn't that he felt pity for Wang Chong, as he would die sooner or later. Rather, he felt pity that he could no longer get any more information from the Tang dynasty's king of foreign lands. In Wang Chong's current state, his death was almost assured. In the distance, Wang Chong was in a perilous situation. Bagushidu's judgment was correct. In the world of his consciousness, the divine sword began to hum once more, a sign that it was about to strike again. Bang! In the blink of an eye, another sword cleaved through the heavens and slashed down at Wang Chong. This sword caused the world to fall silent, and its power was even greater than before. Rumble! This sword was unavoidable, and in a flash, Wang Chong felt an extreme sense of danger. With no time to think, Wang Chong could only collapse and compress all his psychic energy to the limit in an attempt to block this attack. But as the light passed, a cold energy pressed down on his body. This sword was aimed at every inch of Wang Chong's skin, every cell. As Wang Chong retracted his body to prepare for this lightning-fast strike, the sword chi brushed past him like a light breeze. The situation where his stellar energy and psychic energy were halved did not happen. For a moment, Wang Chong was struck dumb. What's going on here? This sword looked even more terrifying than the previous one, but its lethality was not even 1/10 of the previous one. When Wang Chong's psychic energy swept through his body, he immediately found that his judgment was correct. The stellar energy and psychic energy in his body had decreased to a certain extent, but the decrease was minuscule and completely within the range of what he could bear. For a moment, Wang Chong was confused. It was the same attack from the divine sword, but the first strike had made him feel like he had almost died. But this one felt like a light breeze, and it didn't hurt at all. The same attack produced a completely different effect. Buzz. Just as Wang Chong was feeling bewildered, the fog in the world of his consciousness surged. Wang Chong once again entered that world, and he saw the sword that pierced through the sky. Greed. The clouds in the sky changed, and these two large words appeared. Wang Chong hung on the thick chains, stunned and motionless. In that instant, countless thoughts flashed through his mind. Desire barrier, greed, Wang Chong muttered to himself. As long as one was human, they would have desires, and it was impossible to avoid them. Wang Chong had desires, so he had been heavily injured by the first strike. But greed? Was he greedy? Of course, he was greedy. He wanted too many things. And when he, as a youth, used woozy steel to amass millions, tens of millions, even hundreds of millions of taels of gold, Wang Chong had truly been happy. In order to obtain even more profit, he had signed an agreement with the Sindhi high priest. But at the same time, he was not greedy. He could use the vast wealth he had amassed from woozy steel to scatter it all in a single moment, without the slightest regret. And all of this was for the sake of winning the war in the Southwest and protecting the nearly 1 million innocent civilians of the Southwest. He hoped that he could make a name for himself and obtain even greater fame and achievements. Thus, after the Southwest, he went to the Northwest and expanded the territory of the Tang dynasty all the way to Khorasan, which was bordered by the sea. He was still not satisfied with his achievements, and he hoped to fight his way to Baghdad. Finally, he hoped to rule the entire Arabian Empire. But he had not done all this for himself. He could hand over Khorasan to the imperial court without hesitation, and once the West was pacified, he could hand over all military authority to the imperial court. He did not even care about being stripped of his title of king of foreign lands or the young marquis. All he cared about was the future of this world. As for everything else, he only cared about the means to achieve all this. Chapter 1547. As these thoughts flitted through his mind, Wang Chong's brow furrowed as he fell into deep thought. He felt like he had grasped the rhythm and pulse of this divine sword. Upon understanding this, Wang Chong was invigorated. With no time to think, Wang Chong leaped forward like a leopard, light and fast. Clang clang clang. Countless flying swords clashed against the chains, but Wang Chong dodged them in a breathtaking manner. Wonderful! The attacks of the divine swords can affect the first-generation origin immortal sword formation. As he flew, Wang Chong could clearly sense that when he successfully dodged the attacks of the divine swords, the attacks of the thousands of flying swords in the air had weakened. If he didn't have to consider the first-generation origin immortal swords attacks, even if his strength had been greatly reduced, he would still be more than enough to climb a single chain. How could this be? Bagushidu was just about to step forward when he saw this sight, and his entire body trembled in shock. Everything before him had completely surpassed his understanding. Wang Chong's current strength was not even comparable to a profound martial artist, much less an expert like Bagushidu. But not even Ishinishidu had been able to move as swiftly as Wang Chong. Impossible! This can't be! Bagushidu's eyes went wide. Nothing he knew could explain what was happening before him. Buzz! Almost subconsciously, Bagushidu stepped forward toward the massive chains in front of the stone bridge. Could it be that Ishinishidu's memories are all fake? Or did something happen in this final trial that I don't know about? Bagushidu's eyes flickered with shock and doubt. For a moment, he even felt like he and Wang Chong weren't in the same place, were stepping on the same chain. Buzz! Bagushidu's right foot finally stepped on one of the chains, but the moment he touched it, sword chi buzzed, and all the flying swords in the air shot toward Bagushidu like a swarm of locusts. This grandiose aura was even more terrifying than when he had stepped on the chain. Bagushidu grimaced, and his right foot that had just stepped on the chain drew back, his face ashen. Just how did this kid do it? Bagushidu looked at Wang Chong, feeling a deep unease and jealousy. Putting aside Bagushidu, the origin immortal sword once more slashed down at Wang Chong while Wang Chong was still making his way up the chain. This was the sword of pride. It was aimed at those prideful people. But though Wang Chong had been born into a wealthy family, he was not a prideful person. Wang Chong succeeded in blocking the third strike. 100 feet, 15 feet, 17 feet. Wang Chong used the weakening of the origin immortal formation with astonishing speed to advance on the chain. The fourth strike was lust and the fifth was jealousy, but Wang Chong still managed to block both. As he swung the sword, Wang Chong's thoughts became clearer and clearer. I didn't think that there would be such a sword in the world. It doesn't strike at the body, nor does it sever one's origin energy, but it strikes at the deepest depths of one's heart, attacking their most sinful desires. Ishinishidu was a genius of the Turks, a peerless expert of his time. But he couldn't get past the first barrier of desire. He met the sixth-generation successor on the border of the Tang dynasty, and the sixth generation's youth, the world's #1 origin immortal art, and his endless techniques made Ishinishidu jealous, so he committed the sin of jealousy. Moreover, he wanted to seize the secrets of the origin immortal palace by force, so he committed the sin of greed. Even with Ishinishidu's extraordinary abilities, he would still be heavily injured by these 3 strikes. As for Bagushidu, he obtained Ishinishidu's earthblood cauldron and inherited all his memories, as well as all his greed, anger, and obsession. In some aspects, these desires are even stronger than Ishinishidu's. Thus, Bagushidu isn't as aloof as he makes himself out to be. It's not that he doesn't want to, but that he doesn't dare. As these thoughts flew through Wang Chong's mind, his mind became as clear as a mirror. Buzz! The winds howled and the fog churned. After the 5th strike, the 6th quickly followed. Rumble! The world seemed to crumble, and in Wang Chong's eyes, the entire world seemed to be tearing apart. This 6th strike was completely different from the previous ones. Before the sword had even slashed down, a blazing red flame had wrapped around it. Wang Chong grimaced at the sight of this flame, and his feet came to a sudden stop. Wang Chong sensed a familiar emotion from this sword. Anger. This sword was aimed at the anger in the depths of one's heart. Damn it! Wang Chong's heart tightened, and he instantly lost his composure. He was not arrogant, jealous, greedy, or lustful, but his anger. In both his last life and this life, Wang Chong had never been able to control it. And his anger was far more intense than the average person's. Without this anger, he would not have been able to stand here and have a chance to start over. This is troublesome. Rumble. Just when everyone believed that Wang Chong would be able to survive this tribulation and reach the other side, Wang Chong suddenly trembled, blood gushing out of his skin, and his body began to weaken. The chains shuddered, and Wang Chong's body swayed as he almost fell off the chains. But even though Wang Chong had clenched his fists and successfully avoided this calamity, his body was still shuddering along with the chains. The situation seemed extremely dangerous, and he was in danger of falling at any moment. How could this be? What's going on? On the stone bridge, Bagushidu's expression tensed up. Up until now, Wang Chong had been the person with the highest chance of crossing the chains. If not even he could safely cross, the others would find it even more difficult. But at this moment, the danger Wang Chong was facing was far more terrifying than anyone could imagine. After the 6th sword, the Origin Immortal Formation's 7th sword followed. If the 6th sword had only taken half of Wang Chong's life, the 7th was enough to make Wang Chong's blood freeze and plunge him into a bottomless abyss. The crime of slaughter. Before the 7th sword had even been unleashed, Wang Chong already knew the name of this sword. The most evil in the world was slaughter, which was why there were such things as the demonic path and the evil path. This 7th strike was the strongest strike, and it was also the deadliest strike. Even the time it took to brew this strike was longer than any of the previous strikes. Wang Chong was the great general, the king of foreign lands, and in his last life, the grand marshal who had commanded the world's armies. He had spent half his life on the battlefield killing countless people. In the War of the Southwest alone, he had killed more than 400,000 Mengshi Zhao and Uzun armies, and in the Battle of Talas and Battle of Khorasan he had killed more than 1 million Arab soldiers. At the age of 18, he had killed more than 1.5 million soldiers. In terms of the weight of slaughter, no one could surpass Wang Chong. If Ishinishidu had been killed out of jealousy 200 years ago, then Wang Chong had probably killed too many people and died on the spot. Buzz. The 7th sword was still descending, but its energy was still rising, far surpassing the sum of the previous 6, and it showed no signs of stopping. Even worse was that this sword had already locked onto Wang Chong. In this situation, Wang Chong would find it extremely difficult to even move. In the sky, the swords buzzed as if sensing what was about to happen. The thousands of flying swords, broken swords, and broken swords of the first-generation Origin Immortal Sword formation gathered above Wang Chong like a dark cloud, far more numerous than ever before. The pressure on Wang Chong instantly multiplied. Chong! Behind him, at the end of the stone bridge, deep in the fog, Chief Wushang and the evil emperor had uneasy looks on their faces. At this moment, there was nothing they could do. If they stepped on the chains, they would only increase the pressure on Wang Chong. Not only would they be of no help, they would only drag down Wang Chong. Moreover, 80% of the origin energy here was under the first-generation successor's control, and outsiders could not interfere with the Origin Immortal Sword formation. In a flash, Wang Chong was in grave danger. Rivers of blood, millions of corpses. Wang Chong was a natural-born commander, a commander who had lived 2 lives and had killed countless people. If this sword fell, there was no way he could survive. Buzz! The sword blazed with light, even exuding crimson light. In the face of this sword aimed at his soul, every cell in Wang Chong's body, every strand of his soul, was under unimaginable pressure. A moment later, the sky darkened as the sword rose from the ground. It was finally the final moment. Something's wrong. At this moment, Wang Chong's face was pale, his psychic energy and stellar energy rapidly consumed. In the face of death, Wang Chong was bursting with all his potential. Almost instinctively, Wang Chong sensed that something was wrong. The Origin Immortal Lord couldn't have set up such a suicidal trap. If that was the case, why didn't he cut down the chains so that no one could get through? Moreover, no one is perfect. Given the characteristics of this divine sword, not only can no one in the Origin Immortal sect inherit it, no one can even get close to it. Not even the Origin Immortal Lord has the right to use this immortal sword. This couldn't have been the Origin Immortal Lord's intention. A bolt of lightning flashed through his mind. Cold sweat beaded on Wang Chong's forehead, but his mind was working faster than ever. At this moment, time seemed to slow to a crawl. Everyone has their flaws. Desire, greed, jealousy, arrogance, anger, and slaughter, these were practically everyone's weaknesses. No one can escape this, not even the forgers. The more critical the moment, the calmer Wang Chong became. Chapter 1548. As this final thought flitted through his mind, Wang Chong's mind rumbled like a bolt of lightning. At this moment, Wang Chong knew that he had made a fatal error in his understanding of the sword. The core purpose of the sword, or rather, the meaning of its existence, was not to judge evil. But if this was not the case, then what was it? Time ticked by, and Wang Chong did not have much time left. At this moment, Wang Chong was like a man teetering on the edge of the abyss, struggling for that last sliver of life. Desire is the root of human evil. Obsession, resentment, and hatred are all desire, born from desire. The opposite of desire is not desire, and not desire is righteousness. Righteousness, and light are the source of all good. As this thought flitted through his mind, Wang Chong's body trembled in understanding. He felt as if he had grasped the core of this series of events. If killing is a sin, then the opposite of killing is not killing. Not killing is benevolence. Buzz. Like a bolt of lightning, Wang Chong's body trembled and his eyes went wide. At that moment, he seemed to understand something. Benevolence and righteousness, yes. The Origin Immortal Lord was not some evil cultivator, nor was he someone who abhorred evil. The Spring and Autumn Tao did not advocate punishing evil, but promoting good. Wang Chong's mind was in turmoil, but in the end his eyes were bright and his mind clear. The opposite of arrogance is rudeness. The opposite of jealousy is wisdom. Only wisdom can restrain jealousy. The opposite of anger is gentleness and humility. The opposite of lust is righteousness. Only by keeping the righteousness in mind can one avoid lust. This divine sword did not advocate using violence to curb violence, nor was it punishing evil, but promoting good. Its core was not killing, but benevolence, righteousness, propriety, wisdom, trustworthiness, gentleness, respect, and humility. As this final thought flitted through Wang Chong's mind, His eyes began to crackle with lightning. He suddenly understood what sword it was. This was not a sword of punishment, but a true sword of kings. In front of this king's sword, there was no place for lust or desire. Ishinishidu had misjudged this sword, only seeing it as a rare and powerful sword, which was why he had died here. Bagushidu also didn't know what sword this was, so if he dared to attack, he would still die. No gold is perfect, and no one is perfect. Everyone has their own weaknesses. The most important thing was to let this sword feel the righteousness in his heart. That was the most important thing. The Origin Immortal Lord had not left this sword behind to protect it in the sunless depths of the earth. His goal was to use this sword to select truly virtuous and righteous people. That was why he left the 2 chains behind instead of cutting them off. He was choosing a master for this sword. Rumble. Thunder boomed, the sun and moon rose, and as Wang Chong's mind surged, the world underwent a massive transformation. Rumble. There was a heaven-shaking boom as that mountainous pressure on Wang Chong's body suddenly vanished. Wang Chong raised his head and saw for the first time that the golden sword was covered in words. From top to bottom, each stroke was dignified and upright. They were benevolence, righteousness, propriety, wisdom, trustworthiness, gentleness, respect, and humility. These 10 large words, like iron hooks and silver strokes, went straight into the heart. Buzz. In the world of his mind, Wang Chong suddenly stood up. His eyes shone with a dazzling light. At this moment, he suddenly knew what he had to do. Without the slightest hesitation, Wang Chong completely opened up his heart and released all his ambitions. The sun and moon shone brightly, the world majestic. He had gone through the tribulation of death and reincarnated 9 times for no other reason than that the world, the mountains, the rivers, and the common people would not be destroyed. He hoped that the civilization of the Central Plains would continue for 10,000 years. This heart, this thought, all was clear. All that he desired, all that he could hide. Wang Chong slowly closed his eyes and opened up his mind. The various scenes from his last life, the crumbling of mountains and rivers, the burning of fire, the corpses of the common people, all these scenes of azura and bloodshed surged out of his mind and into the divine sword. Lives were like ants, mountains and rivers as weighty as heaven and earth. If the divine sword had a spirit, please lend me a hand. Buzz. A moment later, the thousands of golden flying swords that had been flying toward Wang Chong suddenly froze in the air. Not only that, clang, the metal lock that had been bent all this time and even trembled in the fierce wind seemed to have received a strange power, suddenly and fiercely pulling straight, becoming incomparably straight. Not only that, in the depths of the mist, where there were no fierce winds or waves, golden light erupted. The thick mist parted, and the Origin Immortal Sword that had been hidden at the end of the chain this entire time suddenly appeared before everyone's eyes, exuding a vast and majestic aura. Bagushidu grimaced at this sight, a very ill foreboding in his heart. While Bagushidu was still reeling in shock, the seemingly dying Wang Chong suddenly became full of life and vigor, and shot forward like a bolt of lightning, reaching the end of the chain. Wang Chong, stop! Bagushidu's roar resounded through the world. The final barrier left behind by the Origin Immortal Lord was so dangerous that not even Bagushidu knew that he would be able to overcome it. Thus, he had chosen a scapegoat like Wang Chong. Although he had said that he hoped that Wang Chong would take the divine sword for him, deep down, Bagushidu didn't believe him. But at this moment, the distant Wang Chong seemed to have heard nothing. His body was like a leopard, shooting forward like a bolt of lightning. He was already very close to the end of the chain. Stop! Bagushidu once more shouted from the end of the stone bridge, his voice tinged with impatience and rage. But at this moment, Wang Chong had no time to worry. Life and death will depend on this. Wang Chong raised his head and looked forward, his eyes bright as snow. Bagushidu would never let him go. Wang Chong had understood this from the very start. Whether it was to complete his deal with Osmish Khagan, eliminate the scourge of the Western Turks, or seize the divine sword, Bagushidu would never let him go. If he charged forward, he might still have a chance, but if he listened to Bagushidu, he would be firmly in his grasp. Like a drowning man, he would sink into the bottomless abyss without the slightest hope. More importantly, when he had obtained the divine sword's approval, Wang Chong had felt an indescribable strange sensation, as if he had formed some sort of connection with the divine sword. Not only that, Wang Chong had used up a great deal of his energy, but at that moment, Wang Chong suddenly felt strands of spiritual energy that had belonged to the origin immortal sword formation surge into his body. Wang Chong's dried-up dantian was like rain after a long drought, recovering at an astonishing speed. Even Wang Chong's expended psychic energy was recovering at an incredible rate. What shocked Wang Chong the most was the divine sword suppression of Bagushidu's energy. The black stellar energy that Bagushidu had sent into Wang Chong's body was dark and cold, and brimming with the savagery of a Turkic wolf of the steppe. This negative energy was precisely what the king's sword naturally countered. Wang Chong sensed that the closer he got to the sword, the more the black stellar energy that Bagushidu had used to suppress him was suppressed. Wang Chong immediately understood that if he wanted to escape Bagushidu, the sword at the end of the chain was his only and final chance. The final link. Wang Chong raised his head and looked across. All the flying swords in the sky had stopped the moment he had obtained the sword's approval, completely ignoring Wang Chong. Such a situation had never happened before in the history of the Origin Immortal sect. At this moment, Wang Chong finally saw the divine sword right in front of him. Wang Chong's body shot through the air like a flood dragon, leaping off the chains and landing on the fog-shrouded altar. In front of the altar stood the tall and mighty figure of the first-generation successor like a god. But even more dazzling than the first-generation successor was the Origin Immortal divine sword thrust into the ground in front of him. In a flash of light, Wang Chong extended his hands and grabbed the hilt of the Origin Immortal divine sword. In the rear, Bagushidu's expression turned extremely nasty. Bagushidu had comforted himself by thinking that Wang Chong was under immense pressure and might not have hurt him, but when Wang Chong stepped onto the altar and gripped the sword with both hands, his last bit of hope vanished. But when Wang Chong stepped onto the altar and gripped his sword with both hands, the last sliver of hope in his heart vanished. Without a doubt, Wang Chong had betrayed him. This fellow was completely out of his control. Foolish king of foreign lands, you are seeking your own death. Bagushidu's pupils constricted, his eyes turning as frigid as the harsh winter. So what if he was unparalleled in intelligence and resourcefulness? Did he really think that he could escape from his grasp just because he had broken through this chasm? How ignorant! Kacha! A moment later, Bagushidu clenched his fist and cracked, the sound of his joints contracting resounding through the abyss. Bagushidu immediately used the supreme forbidden art of the earth sect of the Jueyang Holy Mountain, the Dark Moon's flame, the moment Wang Chong gripped the Origin Immortal sword. Boom! In an instant, the black restriction spell buried deep inside Wang Chong's body was like a wildfire. It rose up and burned fiercely. Open! Chapter 1549. Rumble. As Wang Chong pulled on the Origin Immortal sword, the entire underground world rumbled and quaked. Clatter! High above the heads of the powerful martial artists, the ceiling clattered as large chunks of stone, dust, and metal began to fall from above. Bang! One of the massive rocks struck one of the chains, causing the entire chain to fiercely sway. At this moment, the entire underground world seemed like it was on the verge of collapse. What's going on? What happened? How could there be such a massive quaking? What's going on? At the same time, in another underground cave, several experts from the Xiedao sect also raised their heads, their expressions shocked and unmoving. The shockwave was too powerful. It felt as if the entire underground world was collapsing and was about to bury the group of people underground. This was not something that any martial artist could do in a battle. Ha! The Origin Immortal art. It must be the Origin Immortal art. Someone must have found the world's #1 art. Let's go! In the third area of the Origin Immortal cave, one of the sect experts seemed to understand something, and his eyes lit up. Before his companions could react, He shot toward the source of the tremors with incredible speed. Buzz. At the same time, in the underground palace, the earth trembled and a large amount of dust fell from above. With a boom, a thick metal pillar of the underground palace directly fell and smashed onto the ground, causing a cloud of dust to rise into the air. In a flash, the Righteous Alliance forces all stopped. Alliance Lord? They all turned to the leader of the Jingqi League, Song Yuan. Song Yuan said nothing, but raised his head toward the source of the quaking. For the first time, this titan of the righteous path who would remain unfazed even if Mount Tai collapsed slightly frowned. Looks like someone has already arrived there. A familiar voice reached their ears. Vice Alliance Master Xie Guangding had his sleeves fluttering. He walked up from the back and stood next to Song Yuan. Both of them looked in the same direction. The underground palace is guarded by a disciple of the sixth-generation Origin Immortal Lord, and the journey is fraught with difficulties. I wonder who could be so fast. Xie Guangding's brows were tightly furrowed, his expression grave. Experts had been plentiful in this operation to the northwest, and the Jingqi League had almost turned out in full force, but they had still failed to find the Origin Immortal Art. This was undoubtedly a major setback for the Jingqi League. I hope it's not that person. Song Yuan suddenly spoke. It was a simple sentence, and he didn't even mention who it was. However, Xie Guangding's expression changed when he heard it. But before he could say anything, Song Yuan had already disappeared in front of him. Go. No matter what price I have to pay, I must forcefully break through. The Origin Immortal Art. Someone must have found it. Let's go. Rumble. The earth quaked as a panicked roar resounded through the ground. As Song Yuan and the Jingqi League charged toward the core, the Black Yin Ancestors' Black Dragon roared and led the Bone Devil and the countless 5 Ancestor Alliance disciples toward the source of the quaking. The underground palace was fraught with danger, and many of the 5 Ancestor Alliance's experts had already died. But there was no time to worry about such things. If they could not obtain the supreme and infinite Origin Immortal Art, they would have come for nothing. So many people would have died for nothing. Most importantly, as a famous martial arts giant of the evil path, how could he tolerate this kind of thing where his treasures were snatched right under his nose? Rumble. With a shrill whistle, the group vanished from the passage, hurrying in the direction of Wang Chang's group. At this moment, anyone who could sense the quaking rushed toward Wang Chang's group like a tide. Wang Chong had no idea about any of this, nor did he know that when he pulled out his sword, he had driven the crowd into a frenzy and drawn all the martial artists underground. Open for me. At this moment, Wang Chang's mind was completely focused on the sword in front of him. When he exerted his strength, the entire world seemed to tremble. At that moment, Wang Chong felt like he was not pulling out a sword, but an enormous world. Bang! After what seemed like both a second and countless eons, Wang Chong exerted force through his hands, the veins on his body bulging. Rumble! Finally, with a heaven-shaking boom, the ground cracked, and the divine sword that had been buried underground for so long was pulled out of the ground in a burst of golden light. The moment Wang Chong pulled out his sword, an enormous wave of energy surged out of the divine sword and into Wang Chang's body. Kakla. Wang Chang's body began to explode. This majestic, dignified energy, imbued with the righteous path of the world, rushed into Wang Chang's meridians, and then flowed down into Wang Chang's dantian, extinguishing the energy that Bagushidu had hidden in Wang Chang's body. Bagushidu's dark moon blaze was a supreme forbidden art of the Eastern Turks. Not even a peak great general would be able to block it. In the history of the Earth sect, the number of supreme experts who had died to the dark moon blaze was innumerable. But this energy melted like snow in the face of the Origin Immortal Sword's righteous energy that seemed to pierce through the past and present, as dazzling as the sun and moon. Not only that, the moment Wang Chong pulled out his sword, a vast energy surged into every meridian and cell in Wang Chong's body, nourishing the energy that Wang Chong had consumed. This energy was different from any energy that Wang Chong had encountered before. It was extremely dense, similar to the Origin Immortal stellar energy, but much denser than any origin immortal stellar energy that Wang Chong had encountered before. Moreover, ordinary origin immortal stellar energy was golden, but the energy within this divine sword was violet gold and exuded a divine energy. What shocked Wang Chong the most was, as this energy surged into Wang Chong's body, it completely obliterated the thousands of different kinds of energy that Wang Chong had absorbed through the great yin-yang heaven creation art. One had to realize that for a very long time, Wang Chong had been in constant danger of cultivation defect because of the thousands of conflicting energies in his body. But now, as the energy from the divine sword surged into his body, the problem of mixed energies that had plagued Wang Chong for so long was instantly resolved. At the same time, this also meant that Wang Chong's cultivation defect had been completely cured. Wonderful! Wang Chong was ecstatic to sense the change in his body, and he almost didn't dare to believe his own eyes. Without these problems in his body, his strength had instantly reached its peak, and he was even stronger than he had been in the past. This was Wang Chong in his most perfect state. But this was not the only thing that shocked and delighted Wang Chong. You finally arrived. At this moment, a heavy voice rang out in Wang Chong's ear, tinged with respect and reverence, as well as a deep sense of relief. Bang! The sound of a knee hitting the ground rang out, and as Wang Chong watched in shock, the first-generation successor's majestic and mountainous body suddenly kneeled and lowered his proud head. This corpse that had been dead for almost 1,000 years in Wang Chong's mind was actually submitting to Wang Chong for the first time. Clink clink clang. At almost the same time, the thousands of flying swords in the sky began to shine, their tips lowering as they bowed to Wang Chong. What's going on here? The distant crowd was flabbergasted. In the fog, Wang Chong's master, the evil emperor, and the chief of Wushang were standing side by side at the edge of the cliff, staring in shock at this strange phenomenon. Impossible! What's going on here? At this moment, no one was more shocked than Bagushidu. He immediately activated the Dark Moon's flame in Wang Chong's body, but this legendary forbidden art of the Earth sect had no effect whatsoever. Bagushidu believed that something had gone wrong and tried 3 more times, but Wang Chong still showed no reaction. It was like this forbidden art had been planted in someone else's body. And this peerless origin immortal sword formation, which had sent the third-generation swordsman of the same origin into the abyss, completely ignored the outsider Wang Chong. Not only that, the swords in the sky and the first-generation swordsman on the altar all bowed their heads to Wang Chong. This sort of phenomenon had completely surpassed Bagushidu's understanding. Ishinishidu and that final, insurmountable heavenly tribulation seemed to be nothing in front of Wang Chong. Impossible! This can't be! Even someone as composed as Bagushidu lost his composure in the face of such a major shock. His eyes were icy as he stared at the young figure, his eyes exploding with killing intent. At this moment, Wang Chong's attention was completely focused on the divine sword. Congratulations to user for triggering the world event, Origin Immortal Sword, Basic. Rewarding user with 100,000 points of destiny energy. In addition, activating the branch skill, Kindred Flame. Kindred Flame, for creatures with broken consciousnesses that are struggling at death's door and on the verge of collapse, user can temporarily grant them the ability to move for a short period of time. This skill requires absorbing the target's broken consciousness, so it can only be used once on each target. Note, as this skill requires fusing with the target's broken consciousness, a certain amount of preparation time is required. Chapter 1550. Chapter 1519. Chapter 1519 Inch My mission is complete. At this moment, the familiar voice sounded in front of Wang Chong once again, and this time, the voice was getting weaker and weaker. Before he could finish speaking, clang 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 clang. In the void behind him, the tens of thousands of golden flying swords instantly lost all of their luster and degenerated into ordinary metal, falling into the abyss. Bang! Almost at the same time, the shoulders of the first generation's mountainous body drooped, and his head drooped. It was as if he had completed his destiny, and he instantly froze in place, motionless. As the flying sword fell, the last shred of his aura dissipated. Buzz! Seeing that the first gen's remnant consciousness was about to dissipate, Wang Chong's heart thumped. Without the slightest hesitation, he pressed his palm against the first gen's shoulder. The instant Xiao Chen's palm touched the frost iron, he felt an ice-cold sensation coming from his fingertips. Without the slightest hesitation, Wang Chong instantly activated the branch ability he had obtained before. Activate Xinhua. With a thought from Wang Chong, a tiny purple flame passed through Wang Chong's fingertip and entered the body of the first general. The first gen's body was still like a stone, standing there motionlessly. The torch fire entered the first gen's body, and a faint blood-red color immediately appeared on the surface. In his body, the tiny ball of torch fire flowed through his meridians and into the depths of the first gen's mind. It floated there motionlessly, and the first gen's dissipating consciousness seemed to be pulled by a suction force towards the area where the tiny ball of purple flames was. The activation of Xinhua required time, but to Wang Chong he had already gotten rid of the hidden injuries in his body and cured his cultivation deviation. Now he had enough strength to protect himself and at the same time, enough time. The underground world was filled with danger, and to Wang Chong, keeping a first-generation expert was equivalent to keeping a peerless expert. This could also be used in case of emergencies. Buzz. After doing all this, Wang Chong did not hesitate. He quickly stepped over the corpses and walked to the front of the altar. As early as at the end of the stone bridge, Wang Chong had seen something placed on the altar, and reality had confirmed his speculation. There were also a few items placed on the altar. They were all red sandalwood colored and had a mottled surface. It looked like a square wooden box that had been around for a long time. The other item was a small golden pill bottle that was 6 to 7 inches tall and looked like a gourd. The small bottle was glossy and exquisite. Because of the Dan Qi, Wang Chong could smell a fragrant aroma even before he got close. Exalted Immortal Pill. Wang Chong glanced at it and recognized the ancient seal script on it. Without the slightest hesitation, Wang Chong reached out and grabbed the small bottle and wooden box on the altar. Wang Chong did not open the bottle containing the Origin Immortal Scroll, but the red sandalwood box. The moment the wooden box was opened, a small booklet immediately came into view. Formation Heavenly Book. Wang Chong rejoiced at the words on the cover. The Formation Elder had asked him to find the Formation Heavenly Book, which he had finally obtained. Without the slightest hesitation, Wang Chong picked up the Formation Heavenly Book and glanced down. Wang Chong had originally believed that the Origin Immortal Art would be beneath the Heavenly Book, but when he lifted the lid, Wang Chong was struck dumb. The bottom of the box was empty. Other than the Formation Heavenly Book, there was nothing else in the box. What's going on here? For a moment, Wang Chong was dumbfounded. Is the Origin Immortal Art not here? He had always believed that the true Origin Immortal Art was on this altar. And logically speaking, the first-generation successor was guarding the final gate, so the Origin Immortal Art should also be here. Was the situation different from what he had imagined? Perhaps this was not the final gate? At this moment, Wang Chong's mind was in turmoil, countless thoughts flitting through his mind. But before he had time to think, an icy shout came from behind him. King of Foreign Lands, give me the Origin Immortal Sword and the wooden box. That shout contained boundless killing intent. In an instant, even the entire space seemed to freeze. The temperature plummeted as if it had fallen into an ice cave. 800 meters away, on the other end, Bagushidu's expression was cold as he stepped onto the chains. With a wave of his black sleeve, he shot toward Wang Chong like a bolt of lightning. His eyes were fixed on the Origin Immortal Sword in Wang Chong's hand and the wooden box. As the flying sword fell, the first-generation successor's energy vanished from the air, and the Origin Immortal Sword collapsed on its own. As for the core of the treasury, the Origin Immortal Sword and the Origin Immortal Art in the wooden box, he was determined to take them back to the Solar Holy Mountain. Anyone who dared to stop him would die. Buzz! As he flew forward, Bagushidu's expression chilled, and a powerful energy pierced through the air to lock onto Wang Chong. Bagushidu, you're delusional. On the other side, Bagushidu had just begun to move when Wang Chong sensed his aura and immediately turned his head. For a nobleman, 10 years was not too long, but against Bagushidu, it wouldn't take that long. Whether it was because of the seal Bagushidu had placed on him, his other actions, or his concern for the Tang dynasty, Wang Chong was determined to eliminate Bagushidu, the future state teacher of the Earth sect. Bang! Without the slightest hesitation, Wang Chong grabbed the Origin Immortal Sword and jumped off the altar. Midway, he lightly tapped on the thick chains and shot toward Bagushidu. Now that his hidden injuries were gone, Wang Chong no longer had any misgivings about dealing with Bagushidu. Rumble! In the air, the winds howled and thunder boomed. Yin and Yang, the sun and moon illusions that represented the great yin-yang heaven creation art once more appeared in the air. Moreover, they were much more solid than before, like the miniature great Yin and miniature sun of the world. The core of the Origin Immortal Treasury had already been condensed with a vast amount of energy, and now, under Wang Chong's control, this energy surged toward Wang Chong's Origin Immortal Sword and slashed at Bagushidu. Great yin-yang art. This attack contained not just Wang Chong's own strength, but also the energy that the great yin-yang art had drawn from the entire abyss. The power of this attack was unimaginable. Heaven-supporting pillar. At the same time, Bagushidu's eyes shone with cold light. His right index finger, middle finger, and ring finger formed a hook, and he clawed at Wang Chong, causing the world to sway. Clang clang clang. The 3 earth blood cauldrons appeared around him, and the world rumbled as a passage opened in the depths of space-time. A dark and indescribably pure energy surged out and rumbled toward Wang Chong. Heaven-supporting pillar. This was one of the strongest techniques of the Earth sect of the Eastern Turks. It was a simple technique that returned the complex to the simple, and though it was simple, it was imbued with immense power. Boom! With an earth-shattering sound, 2 majestic forces violently collided with each other in the void. The spiritual energy between heaven and earth boiled and drifted about. The boundless energy radiated in all directions, causing the dense fog that had been lingering in the air all year round to suddenly explode. Clang! There was a metallic clatter as a violet bolt of lightning struck the 3 earth blood cauldrons around Bagushidu. Bzz. Bagushidu swayed a few times on the thick chains, but he quickly steadied himself like an immovable mountain. Across from him, Wang Chong was pushed back 6 or 7 steps as if struck by a heavy blow, his body staggering and almost falling off the chains. Ha, king of foreign lands, you're no match for me. Bagushidu roared with laughter as he glanced across at Wang Chong, a smile appearing on his face. So what if you have the Origin Immortal Sword? You don't have the strength to use the sword's power. Even if you have the sword, you're still no match for me. I advise you to obediently hand over the Origin Immortal Sword and the things on the altar, and I can still consider sparing the lives of the 2 of you. Bagushidu didn't need to turn his head to know that the chief of Wushang and the evil emperor had surrounded him from behind. But Bagushidu was fearless. As the sect master of the Earth sect, he had always possessed outstanding talent, a sturdy foundation, and extraordinary willpower. In this aspect, he was not one bit inferior to a titan of the Central Plains like the evil emperor. Moreover, he had 3 earth blood cauldrons that had retained half of Ishinishidu's power. With these ritual tools, he had already reached the legendary dark radiant heaven, subtle, of the Eastern Turks. In this aspect, Wang Chong and the others were still lacking compared to him. Bagushidu, don't spout nonsense. If you want that sword, you'll have to defeat me first. Wang Chong chuckled, his hands gripping the sword as if he had no intention of fighting Bagushidu. Truly seeking death. A hint of anger finally appeared in Bagushidu's eyes at Wang Chong's words. Since you want to die, I'll fulfill your wish. Boom. Bagushidu stomped down, his black robe once more flapping in the wind. Without the slightest hesitation, Bagushidu's already powerful energy soared once more. His energy locked onto Wang Chong, ready to launch a new wave of attacks against Wang Chong. Crack. Chapter 1551. Earth Blood Cauldron. As this thought flashed through his mind, Bagushidu grimaced, his face turning ghastly pale. His aura fused with the Earth Blood Cauldron. In that instant, he sensed that the Earth Blood Cauldron, the earth blood cauldron that had been passed down for hundreds of years had actually split open at a speed visible to the naked eye right under his nose. Furthermore, the crack was still expanding. No, this can't be. Bagushidu's eyes went round in disbelief. These 3 ritual tools of the Earth sect were sturdy and powerful, and even the best of weapons would find it impossible to leave a scratch on them. This was because the Earth Blood Cauldron had been forged from materials that the Earth sect of the Solar Holy Mountain had expended the strength of the entire Turkic Khaganate over decades to gather from all over the world. They were already extremely rare materials, and many supreme experts of the Earth sect had also added many secret arts and seals to them. In Bagushidu's understanding, these ritual tools were indestructible. But Bagushidu had never imagined that a single strike from Wang Chong would be able to leave a crack in the Earth Blood Cauldron. Although it was only a short crack, Bagushidu's heart felt like it was about to split open. Haha, Bagushidu, you're getting happy too early. All you're relying on is the Earth Blood Cauldron. Once I destroy your ritual tool, let's see what else you can rely on. At this moment, a voice resounded through the world, shattering the silence. Nearby, Wang Chong also saw the change in Bagushidu's Earth Blood Cauldron, and Wang Chong's eyes instantly brightened. The Origin Immortal Sword was actually able to counter Bagushidu's Earth Blood Cauldron? This was an unexpected discovery for Wang Chong. Wang Chong had originally been relying on the fact that he had recovered all his energy, gotten rid of all his hidden injuries, and the enormous energy contained in the Origin Immortal Sword, so he was not afraid of fighting to the death with Bagushidu. But this discovery was a massive harvest for Wang Chong. Bagushidu, let's go again. With a strange look in his eyes, Wang Chong howled. Before Bagushidu could attack, he gathered up all his stellar energy and the surrounding origin energy and shot forward like a bolt of lightning at Bagushidu. Bang! There was a heaven-shaking boom as a white bolt of lightning flashed between the two. This time, Wang Chong remained motionless, but Bagushidu was forced back several steps by the enormous pressure. Kakla. The cracks on Bagushidu's Earth Blood Cauldron were originally only as thick as a strand of hair, but after the second blow of the Origin Immortal Sword, they had not only lengthened by 6 to 7 inches, but also widened and became more and more obvious. It seemed like Wang Chong's sword would cleave through it in just a few more blows. Impossible! This is impossible! I can't! Bagushidu was flabbergasted. Just 2 blows from Wang Chong's sword had left him in an indescribable shock. His entire world had collapsed. Wang Chong's sword had not only cleaved apart the Earth Blood Cauldron of the Earth sect, but it had also cleaved apart the deeply rooted belief in his heart. Even more serious was that these 3 Earth Blood Cauldrons were his life-bound artifacts, and Bagushidu's energy and Yuan spirit had fused with them. As the Earth Blood Cauldrons split apart, Bagushidu's energy began to leak out, and his powerful strength began to drop. Bagushidu, hand over your life. Now is the time for you to pay the price. At almost the same time, 2 furious storms of energy shot out from the fog and lunged at Bagushidu. Myriad energies returned to the origin. Yangren Divine Art. With 2 furious roars, the evil emperor and the chief of Wushang joined the fray. Up ahead, Wang Chong's eyes were bright as he swung the Origin Immortal Sword at Bagushidu. The space on these 2 chains was narrow and limited movement. Not even Bagushidu would be able to dodge this pincer attack. Bastard! Bagushidu was both shocked and infuriated. At this moment, he no longer had any of his previous grace and composure. So what if you have the Origin Immortal Sword? Even if I have to be heavily injured, I'll still kill you and your disciple. Being forced into desperate straits by Wang Chong's group of 3 had forced Bagushidu to unleash his monstrous killing intent. Sundering earth and collapsing mountains. Bagushidu's eyes flashed with cold light as he used one of the strongest techniques of the Earth sect. Rumble. The earth cracked and the mountains collapsed. Under the influence of an invisible force, the entire cave trembled violently, as if it would collapse at any moment. The 3 cauldrons on Bagushidu's body also shot forward, transforming into a triangular formation that slowly revolved around Bagushidu. At the same time, Bagushidu poured more stellar energy into the Earth Blood Cauldrons, causing them to explode with energy as vast as 3 mountains. Boom boom boom. The attacks of the trio continued to strike at Bagushidu, but they were immediately stopped by the powerful fortress formed by the Earthblood cauldrons. Jumping clowns, I'll kill you first, and then I'll kill that brat. Bagushidu was infuriated by this three-pronged attack. As he used the Earthblood cauldron to block the trio, Bagushidu's eyes chilled. Without the slightest hesitation, he turned around and clawed at the Wushang village chief and demonic emperor old man behind him. Kree. The air howled as Bagushidu's black stellar energy transformed into blood-red pythons, their faces savage and steely as they howled and lunged at the pair. Earthblood pythons. Bagushidu's move was another supreme technique of the Earth sect. The Earthblood python formed from stellar energy was as tough as steel and as sharp as a divine weapon. In a chaotic battle between top-class experts, it was extremely effective at piercing through stellar energy and could break through an opponent's stellar energy. Bagushidu had relied on this technique to defeat all his competitors on the Solar Holy Mountain and become the Earth Sect Master. One could easily imagine how powerful he was. Wang Chong was currently at his peak, but the evil emperor and the chief of Wushang were far from the same. Moreover, the two of them did not have divine swords, so they were still lacking compared to Bagushidu and his Earthblood cauldrons. As long as Bagushidu could capture these two, he could use them to threaten Wang Chong. When the time came, the Origin Immortal Sword and the treasures on the altar would naturally fall into his hands. Old Village Chief, let's use that move together. Behind him, the demonic Emperor Old Man only needed a glance to understand Bagushidu's intentions. But as Wang Chong's master, the evil emperor had his own pride. In the face of Bagushidu's attack, the evil emperor's expression darkened, and he showed no intention of backing down. That's all we can do. On the other chain, the chief of Wushang's white hair fluttered in the wind. With just a few words, he had understood the evil emperor's intentions. During this period of time, the two of them traveled together and constantly exchanged what they had learned in martial arts. At the same time, they explored higher realms. Although the two of them were still unable to break through to the nuance realm, they managed to figure out a combination ultimate technique. This technique had been derived from the subtle realm energy that Kuteba had used. It was a secret art that combined the strength of two people to open the subtle realm. The conditions for using this secret art were extremely harsh. Two people had to have an extremely high level of cooperation and reach the half-step subtle realm at the same time. But even so, this technique was still rather immature. Because it was a trick and not one that had truly reached the subtle realm, there was a high chance of failure, and there was also a chance that the user would suffer a backlash. The chief of Wushang and the evil emperor had originally estimated that they would need another 3 or 4 months to complete this technique, but they had no time to worry about such things. Universe reversal, Grand Void enters the subtle. At almost the same moment, the chief of Wushang and the evil emperor clasped their left and right palms together while their free hands shot toward Bagushidu. Bang! The place where the left and right palms of the evil emperor and the chief of Wushang clasped together began to glow like a blazing sun, exuding dreadful ripples of energy. In the depths of space and time, rumbling sounds could be heard. Under the effect of this invisible power, another space and time suddenly opened up at this moment. The evil emperor and the chief of Wushang were able to use their combined strength to break through the spatial barrier and open up a path to the subtle realm. At the same time, the vast energy of the minute subtlety realm surged into their bodies at an astonishing speed. How could this be? Bagushidu could sense that the two of them had both entered the subtle realm and their stellar energy had swelled to a new level. His body trembled in shock, his eyes brimming with disbelief. The martial path was a solitary cultivation, and the stronger one was, the more difficult it was to rely on external objects to break through. Bagushidu had spent several years refining these 3 Earthblood cauldrons, and he had paid a heavy price. Moreover, he had relied on external objects to break through the subtle realm, not his own cultivation. Bagushidu was still half a step into the subtle realm, still lacking that final step. For the evil emperor and the chief of Wushang to work together to break through the barrier and enter the subtle realm without any external objects was simply unimaginable. Rumble. Bagushidu didn't have time to think before their attacks collided with Bagushidu's earth blood python with a thunderous momentum. Awur! Chapter 1552. Bagushidu, you dare! But before Bagushidu could strike while the iron was hot, a furious roar came from behind him, a thunderous roar that seemed capable of shattering space itself. Wang Chong gripped the Origin Immortal Sword, his eyes turning red and his body exploding with killing intent. Rumble! As Wang Chong swung his sword, Wang Chong's Origin Immortal Sword seemed to respond to Wang Chong's thoughts and exploded with dazzling light. Not even Wang Chong noticed that a brand new energy imbued with the power of Allah had fused into Wang Chong's stellar energy. Bagushidu paled as he sensed the terrifying rage and killing intent coming from Wang Chong's body, a hint of panic appearing in his eyes. There was no time to think, and Bagushidu was forced to give up on capturing the chief of Wushang and the evil emperor. Instead, he gathered all the power of the 3 Earthblood cauldrons and smashed them at Wang Chong. 3 cauldrons in the air. Bagushidu formed a spell with his right hand, and the 3 cauldrons began to rumble and rumble, the air around them seeming to crumble and collapse. In the next moment, there was an earth-shattering noise. Golden light filled the air as the 2 destructive forces collided violently like comets. So strong! The moment the 2 energies collided, Bagushidu felt his shoulders sink as if a mountain had smashed into him, and his entire face paled. He could clearly sense that this was a full-strength attack from Wang Chong, but this one was even more powerful and terrifying. Each blow of the Origin Immortal Sword was stronger and more difficult to block. Kaklet! Kaklet! Bagushidu was both shocked and infuriated. With each blow of Wang Chong's sword, a crack would appear on the Earthblood cauldrons, and these cracks would grow larger and longer. What Bagushidu found most unacceptable was that these damages were irreparable. The supreme ritual tool of the Earth sect, which had been passed down through the generations, had remained unscathed for several hundred years, and yet it had suffered such irreparable damage at his own hands. Bagushidu simply could not accept this. Earthblood curse. In his fury and shock, Bagushidu's hatred for Wang Chong seeped into his bones. Without the slightest hesitation, Bagushidu immediately used a powerful forbidden art of the Earth sect that specialized in controlling curses. This technique required the sacrifice of a certain amount of essence blood and primordial spirit to strengthen the 3 Earthblood cauldrons. After using this move, one would need to recuperate for at least 3 to 5 months in the future. Furthermore, it would cause irreparable damage to one's spirit and consciousness. The power of the magic tool would also decrease in the next year or so. But Bagushidu had no time to worry about such things. As long as he could eliminate Wang Chong and deal with this powerful foe, it would all be worth it. Moreover, if he didn't stop Wang Chong, the 3 Earthblood cauldrons would really be destroyed by his hands. Plush! Bagushidu bit down on the tip of his tongue and sprayed a mouthful of essence blood mixed with pure stellar energy onto the 3 Earthblood cauldrons. King of foreign lands, this king will have you die. Bagushidu stared at Wang Chong, his fury raging in his heart. But just when he was preparing to use his blood as a sacrifice to communicate with the blood runes on the Earthblood cauldron and activate the Earthblood curse to kill Wang Chong, Bagushidu's mind was thrown into disarray by something unexpected. Buzz. Without any warning, the energy on the 3 Earthblood cauldrons fell into chaos. Bagushidu's blood was unable to seep into the cauldrons. Not only that, Bagushidu had already made the 3 Earthblood cauldrons impregnable, and he had relied on the enormous energy contained within them to break into the dark radiant heaven, giving him strength on par with the subtle realm. But at this moment, the power of the 3 cauldrons had gone completely out of control, and the countless Earth sect masters had spent so much effort to carve them had lost their effectiveness. Without the help of the 3 Earthblood cauldrons, Bagushidu felt like his body was empty. Before he could react, his strength began to recede, dropping from the subtle realm to the half-step subtle realm. How could this be? Bagushidu screamed as he swiftly retreated, his face ghastly pale. He no longer had that disdainful and proud demeanor that seemed to control the entire situation. How could this be? How could the Origin Immortal Sword have this kind of ability? Bagushidu's mind was in turmoil as he stared at the Origin Immortal Sword in Wang Chong's hand like he was looking at a ghost. He had gathered a great deal of information on the Origin Immortal Sword, but he had never heard that this immortal sword could interfere with ritual tools and render them useless. This was beyond Bagushidu's understanding of divine swords. This Origin Immortal Sword was inconceivably powerful, far surpassing the ritual tools of the Earth sect. Bagushidu's face was ghastly pale. For the first time, he felt like he couldn't win against the Origin Immortal Sword-wielding Wang Chong, and he even felt a tinge of fear. How could such a divine sword exist in the world? With this immortal sword here, my magic treasures won't be of any use at all. I have to leave. Bagushidu had always harbored a deep desire for the Origin Immortal Sword, but this time, he finally began to think of retreating. One Wang Chong, the evil emperor, and the chief of Wushang. In the past, he would have had nothing to fear, but now that the Earthblood Cauldron was being countered by the Origin Immortal Sword, Bagushidu could no longer deal with 3 top-class half-step subtle experts at the same time. Bagushidu, do you think you can leave? Wang Chong's eyes were as sharp as lightning as he had long ago seen through Bagushidu's intentions. But Bagushidu was a man who hid a dagger behind his smile. Whether it was for himself or for the Tang dynasty, Wang Chong could not let him escape so easily. Void movement technique. Wang Chong's body swayed as he pushed the void movement technique he had learned from the man in black to its limit. His body rapidly approached Bagushidu, his 2 hands gripping his sword as he swung it down at Bagushidu with a momentum that could cleave apart the heavens. Boom boom boom. Stellar energy exploded and gales howled through the air. In the distance, Wang Chong and Bagushidu were locked in a fierce battle, the chains beneath their feet clattering and shaking as if they would fall at any moment. On the chains, Wang Chong's attacks rained down on Bagushidu. In the face of Wang Chong's terrifying attacks and the cliffs on either side, Bagushidu had nowhere to run. Wang Chong's Origin Immortal Sword had slashed at the Earthblood Cauldron on Bagushidu's body several dozen times. Kaklet. Every time Wang Chong's 4-foot-long Origin Immortal Sword struck the Earthblood Cauldron, a new crack would appear on it. He had struck the 3 Earthblood Cauldrons several dozen times, each blow heavy and powerful. After dozens of blows, Bagushidu's Earthblood Cauldrons were covered in cracks. In some places, the cracks were as wide as a finger and seemed ready to shatter at any moment. King of Foreign Lands, you madman! Bagushidu's long hair blew in the wind, and he was both shocked and furious. Wang Chong's attacks were frenzied, and a dark red torrent of stellar energy was constantly revolving around him. And on his shoulders, the signature red and gold symbols of the great yin-yang heaven creation art, the sun and moon, appeared at the same time in a dazzling display. Wang Chong had fully recovered his energy, and the great yin-yang heaven creation art was displaying its savage side. Not only was spiritual energy gathering in this underground space, even Bagushidu's black stellar energy was restless, wanting to break out of his body and pour into Wang Chong's body. Without the powerful protection of the Earthblood Cauldron, Bagushidu alone could not stop Wang Chong's tyrannical great yin-yang heaven creation art. Bagushidu, accept your fate. Wang Chong's voice was cold and emotionless as it resounded through the world. Bang! As the 2 of them were speaking, the demonic Emperor Old Man and the Wushang village chief silently shot out from behind them. Boom boom boom. Once, twice, thrice. In the face of the combined attacks of 3 supreme experts, Bagushidu's stellar energy was rapidly consumed and growing weaker. Bagushidu couldn't even speak. But this was not the end. While Bagushidu was frantically trying to deal with these attacks, he suddenly heard a loud roar, "Gong Gong Divine Art." Before Bagushidu could react, a massive whirlpool of water appeared above him. Dark clouds roiled as destructive energy fused with these waves. In the center of these waves, one could faintly make out the shape of a trident. At this crucial moment, Jili Laozu had finally struck. There were only 2 chains cast from 1,000-year-old frigid iron above the abyss, and the space was extremely small. Coupled with the fact that he couldn't find a good angle to strike, Jili Laozu had not done much until now. Instead, he had used the water element's ability to conceal his energy to find the best moment to strike. Boom! The three supreme experts of the world attacked at the same time, unleashing three destructive waves of stellar energy that slammed into Bagushidu's stellar energy barrier. Not even someone of Bagushidu's abilities could hold on against this terrifying attack. Thump thump thump. Bagushidu's body trembled as he retreated several steps. The energy in his chest was in disarray and blood was surging up, but Bagushidu forcefully swallowed it back down. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.